Request all of you to put your phones on silent. So are we live? Okay. Okay. Can I request you to please put yourself on mute, Mr. Bisurio? Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. And thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rupali Singh, and I'm happy to be here for this session. And on behalf of Birla Institute of Management Technology, we have this international conference on data envelopment analysis, which started yesterday, and it's going to be till 21st of November. I'm happy to welcome you all to this industry session, and which is going to be chaired by Dr. Srini Parthasarthi. I take this privilege to introduce him. He is a luminary in performance assessment and management within competitive and regulated industries. As the head of Auxera's performance, productivity, and efficiency practice, Dr. Srini's groundbreaking contributions over the past 15 years have shaped regulatory frameworks and strategic decision-making across Europe. From developing innovative tools like Auxera's efficiency and productivity apps to earning accolades such as the Lexology Client Choice Expert Award in Digital and Data 2024, Dr. Srini exemplifies excellence in his field. His academic contributions, having taught at renowned institutions like LSE and the University of Warwick, further solidify his stature as a thought leader. We are privileged to welcome Dr. Srini Parthasarthi as our chair for this session and look forward to his profound insights. A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. I would now request Dr. Ali to say a few words. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are a little behind the schedule, so I don't take too long. I just want to say welcome to the DEA 2024 conference that we have started this morning. This session specifically is related to DEA and regulations that has already been explained, is organized by Dr. Srini. And Dr. Srini is one of my old friends and good friends that he also graduated from LSE, London School of Economics. He's got his PhD from London School of Economy and worked on DEA and regulation for many years. He organized this type of workshop in the previous conference, DEA conferences, and as far as I know, the feedbacks were very good because this is real application on the DEA. Thank you very much, Dr. Srini, for organizing this, and I hope everyone, and also welcome the people, all the participants on the Zoom. I just checked; there are about 50 people registered for the Zoom, and 20 already joined, and there will be some more people who will join. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rupali Ali, for the kind introductions. Afternoon, everyone. My name is Srini Parthasarathi, and welcome to the regulation stream of DEA 2024. As Ali said, we are a bit behind schedule, and we have a tight program, so I'll keep my introductions brief. I see some of you may have followed the literature on regulatory applications involving efficiency and productivity methods. And I see some faces in conferences regularly on DEA or efficiency conferences in Europe and in the US. So you probably understand why we have these sessions, in terms of connecting theory and practice. We call it link-up sessions or practitioner sessions to bring different communities together. But I also see a lot of fresh faces here. So for your benefit, the literature I was referring to is extensive and is rich with applications. By literature, it's not just the scientific literature. So in particular, the scientific literature tends to be sparse. And if you look into regulatory reports and studies commissioned by governments, competition authorities, and policymakers, then you actually get to understand in terms of the vast amount of literature available over the last, popular over the last 40, 50 years. Now, to understand why the literature is extensive, you probably know that there are some sectors, some industries, some markets which don't have which don't have natural competitive forces. And these sectors, they involve very high capital, they are capital intensive, and there are high barriers to entry. So given the lack of competitive forces, governments and authorities need to intervene to stimulate those competitive pressures to ensure that firms operating in those industries, they are able to provide the best possible service for the best possible cost. And they're also able to make timely investments as well, right, for the sake of public and consumers. Now, one of the tools that is commonly applied to enable this is benchmarking. So benchmarking enables these agencies to understand what good practice looks like. So to reveal any inefficiencies, drivers, and blockers of performance that companies can use to improve their operations. And they also help to calibrate incentives to set the right behavior. Okay, so now in this session, we are particularly interested in regulatory applications in water and energy. And we have chosen these two sectors because these are some of the traditional sectors that are regulated. They've been regulated for the past 40, 45 years in different countries. And these sectors are currently undergoing a transformational change in terms of scale of investments, uncertainty, new business models being developed. By applications here, I'm not referring just to lifting some theory and then applying it to a data set. So these are applications where theory gets improved and become more relevant for practitioners like us. So we have assembled a panel of regulatory experts and academic experts as advisors as well from across Europe to share their recent experiences in terms of use of these methods in regulation. And they'll also talk about some of the recent challenges they've encountered. So they are welcome ideas from all of us. Unfortunately, they couldn't travel to be here in person, so we have them join us remotely. We have 5 speakers, Emil Hesche from the Danish Competition Authority, Water Regulatory Authority, part of the Danish Competition Authority, Tore Langseth from the Norwegian Energy and Water Directorate, Daniel Mitchell from Ofwat, the UK water regulator. We have Rui Rita from the Portuguese Energy Authority, and we have Professor Geert Brooncraft, who's an advisor to the Dutch Energy Authority and the German Regulatory Authority. So we have 5 speakers, and I think each speaker gets about 20-25 minutes for the presentation, and then we'll open up for some questions. Now, we do have a tea break in between, so we are a bit delayed, so the sessions are going to be shifted slightly. So we have a tea break in between. So we'll have 3 speakers before the tea break, and then we'll reconvene at 3:30 for the last 2 presentations. And then we kind of envision to end the conversation, the session with a round table on some special topics. So we identify 4 or 5 topics that could be interesting to discuss, but it depends on how the timing goes. So before I hand over to Emil for the first presentation, I would also like to welcome my fellow panelists, Professor Emmanuel Tanasulis and Professor Anup Singh. They both have extensive experience of regulation, much longer than mine, and they've been advising regulators across Europe and across the world, in fact, in terms of the use of these methods in practice. So we kind of go to our first speaker. I hope Emil is on the line. So Emil, Dr. Emil Hesche, he's a specialist consultant and a benchmarking specialist, as I said, with the Danish Water Regulatory Authority, which is governed by the Danish Competition and Consumer Authority. He will talk about the use of these methods in Danish water regulation. Over to you, Emil.
Thank you for that, Srini. Let me just share my screen here. If you can please let me know if you can see it.
Yes. Yeah, we can.
Great. Then let me get started. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Emil Hesche, and I work for the Danish water regulator. So we have developed a new method, which we have used for the first time this year. And I would like to just talk about this method today. So this is the agenda for my talk. I will start by an introduction to the regulation of the Danish water sector. Then I go through the benchmarking method, which is called DEA Order M. And then I will end my presentation with a definition for our inputs and outputs, which are quite unconventional. So I would like to talk a bit about that. So in the Danish water sector, we have approximately 2,500 utilities. So that's a lot, even though we have a quite small country. And most of these utilities are so small that it does not make sense to regulate them. The resources we spend unregulated firms are quite high, so the firms also need to have a given size before it makes sense. Therefore, we also only regulate the biggest 226 of these firms, and only the biggest of these are included in our benchmarking model. We regulate both drinking water and wastewater. We use the same principles, but we benchmark the drinking water and wastewater separately every second year. Today I will focus on drinking water, but we use the same kind of setup on wastewater. So in Denmark, we have chosen to regulate this sector using the revenue cap regulation. So as Srini just told us, the idea here is that all these firms are natural monopolies. So we need to regulate them such that the prices for the consumers will not be too high. Therefore, we as a regulator go in and say to each of the utility in Denmark what the maximum revenue are for a given are allowed to be for a given year. So this is just a simplified version of the revenue cap regulation, but in principle, it's just that we set the revenue cap at time t equal to the revenue cap from last period. Then we adjust it for inflation, we adjust it for a general productivity growth. So we force the water utilities to follow the general productivity growth in the industry in Denmark, such that they keep becoming more productive. And then the important thing is we also adjust it for inefficiency, which we calculate in the benchmarking model. So if the revenue cap is too high, if the firms are inefficient, we reduce the revenue cap such that they cannot require as much revenue as high prices for the consumers as they could if they were fully efficient. And then we do a lot of other stuff, but that's not really important today. Today it's just this inefficiency requirement, individual efficiency requirement, that is important. And it's calculated pretty simple. It's just the difference between the revenue cap from last period and then the efficient level in the DEA model. And then we divide this potential by a catch-up period. So we give all the utilities 8 years to become fully efficient, meaning that we lower the revenue cap 1/8 at a time. And then the idea is after 8 years, the revenue cap should be equal to the firm's efficient cost. And as we know, the efficient cost, X star here, is just, in DA at least, is just the efficiency score multiplied by the cost. So what we are looking for is this efficiency score, and that is why we use DA and benchmarking methods. So as I said, we have a new benchmarking method this year. We have used both DA and SFA, but we have had some empirical problems with these methods. Therefore, we have done an extensive literature review. We have looked at 12 or 13 different methods to find out which one we should use this year and forward. And what we was looking for was, first of all, we wanted a method that could account for noise. So we all know DA cannot really account for noise. If it could, we would just use DA because we like DA. But it cannot account for noise, so we need another method. And here you have to see that there's different between accounting for noise and calculate noise. So we can account for some noise without really knowing how much noise is in the model. We can just take some arbitrary amount of noise and then account for that. That does not mean we calculate the exact amount of noise in the model. We also want our method to be robust over time for small changes in data. This was where our SFA model have failed us for quite some years now. So we don't really want to use SFA anymore, even though SFA can account for noise. We also want a model that is understandable for water firms. It's quite important that the regulated firms actually understand the regulation and know the incentives. And lastly, we want the firms to have incentives to become more efficient. All the methods, all the benchmarking methods we have looked into in a revenue cap setup fulfill the last dot. So all methods give firms incentives to become efficient. So what we found was that the so-called DA order M method proposed by Casals et al. In 2002 is the one we believe fits the criteria above best. So we have chosen that method going forward. And let me just explain if someone don't know the order M method, I'd just like to explain it. It's quite simple. As you can see in the name, it's a DA method. It's just a small extension to DA, this order M. So I hope here you can see my arrow. Let's just start with a standard DA. We have on the figure here, we have on the first axis, we have one output divided by cost, and the second axis, another output divided by cost. We have 3 efficient firms, A, B, and C, which make up the frontier. And then we have a lot of inefficient firms, for example, firm D here, that is compared following the arrow up to the frontier. That's the standard DA as we know it. In DA, all the firms are compared to all other firms, but only the most efficient firms are important. So we look at all the firms, and then we find the most efficient of these firms, and that will be A, B, and C. The difference in order M is here we only look at M firms at a time. So randomly we draw M different firms. Here in this figure, I have just colored them red. So that is completely random, but we have 8 red firms here. And now we state only these M firms are allowed to make up the frontier. So if we do that, they get this new wet frontier here. So we see that firm C and B was not randomly drawn, therefore they cannot be on the order M frontier. And this means that now the order M frontier is pushed downwards compared to the DA. So the firms are happy. We see now firm D look more efficient because the frontier is closer to firm D. So everything is good. Now, of course, the question is, what if we have chosen 8 different firms? Then we get another picture. So I have done that here. Now we see 8 different, some of the same. It's random, but we have a randomly drawn, 8 randomly drawn firms, and we have a new wet frontier here. And we can do it again, and we can do it again, and we can do it, I think in our case, we do it 10,000 times. So we get 10,000 different order M frontiers, where we just randomly pick M firms every time. And then we take an average of all these iterations. And that's it. That's the extension we call order M. And even though it's quite simple, it's really nice because now we actually account for some of the noise which we cannot account for in DA. So let me just show you that in this figure here. So this is the same graph as we saw before. Now it's just on real data instead. So what we see is, again, we have output divided by cost on the first axis, another output divided by cost on the second axis. We have the black lines here are the DA frontier. All the red lines that you see change all the time is all the iterations. So this is the 10,000 iterations. Every time we draw new observations that are allowed to be included on the frontier, and we see all these different frontiers we calculate. And then finally, we have the green frontier. That is the average of all these iterations. So the green frontier will be our final order M model, which we use. And what I mean by noise here is that in DA, we depend a lot on these 5 efficient firms that make up the DA. So we could be afraid of these 5 firms having too much influence in the model. If, for example, they are not representative for the sector, or if there are some mistakes in the data, if we have omitted verbal bias or something, there is some noise here. And that would be a problem because maybe these 5 firms look more efficient than they really are. So in order M, we reduce the dependency on these firms and include more of the less efficient firms in the frontier. So the difference between our order M frontier and the DA frontier is what we call noise. This does not mean we have calculated the exact amount of noise in the model, but we have accounted for some noise in between here, and we give the benefit of the doubt to the firms for this noise. Okay, so that's the idea. Now, even though this is quite nice, we have one big issue, and that is, how do we choose this level of M? So before I took M equal to 8, I picked 8 firms each time. Here you can see I have M equal to 25. But I could pick whatever I want. In the academic literature, we can't really say what M should be. It's up to the model developer to choose M. And that is not really great for a regulatory perspective. We want to have some fixed M, and we want to explain to the sector, to the regulated firms, why we have chosen this exact M. So our big question and what we have looking into and what we will keep looking into is if we can find some method to say something clever about M. What should M be? One way of thinking of this is that we can split the risk between the consumers and the firms. So if we pick a low M, this means we only randomly draw a few firms in each iteration. We will get a low frontier, so a really conservative model which will be good for the firms. They will look efficient, more efficient, meaning they have higher revenue cap and they can set higher prices. However, if we take a high M, it will be good for the consumers because the firms will look more inefficient, so they need to have lower prices, and that is good for consumers. So this is some political decision. Who should pay for this risk of choosing M? Should it be the consumers or the firms? We can also try to look if we want some characteristics to be fulfilled. So we have tried that. We have a lot of different ideas to how to choose M. None of those are really great, but we hope by starting this work that maybe we get some good comments from you guys here or the academic world. Maybe someone will get some good idea from my talk here and the ideas we have. So I would like to just present 3 of the ideas for how we choose M. I think we have 10 more, but these are the best ones, even though they are not really perfect yet. But before I get started with that, let me just show you this graph here, just to state how important it is to choose M. So what we see here is all the different values of M. So remember, we have 74 firms in the drinking water sector. So if you have M equal to 74, we pick all the firms each iteration, meaning we just have a DEA model. So the average efficiency score, we see here on the second axis. The average efficiency score in the sector is 7.8 for high M, and then we see how it gets closer to 7.9 for low M's, and even the average get over fully efficient for really low M. So that doesn't make sense, but where should we put M? It's quite important. I would like to show you 3 different methods we could use to say something about this M. First, we could look at this as we want to reduce the influence from single firms. So we have these most efficient firms on the frontier, and we don't want to depend as much on these firms as we do in DA. So what we see here is for different values of M, then all the lines here are different firms, and the line state how many of the iterations is this firm on the frontier. So for high M's, these most efficient firms are develop the frontier in most of the iterations because they are drawn quite a lot, and every time they are drawn, they will also be on the frontier. So they have a lot of influence in the model. As we reduce M, the likelihood to draw these firms will be less, and then we could put some cutoff value. For example, here we say if M is equal to 48, I think it is, then the likelihood of drawing these firms are less than 50%. In other words, no firms are influencing the model in more than 50% of the iterations. That could be one way of doing this, making sure we have M such that no firms influence the model too much. A similar way is to use the Cook's distance literature. So it's pretty much the same thing. We have all the values of M here, and then we have Cook's distance on the second axis. So Cook's distance just tells us how much does a single firm influence the model. So we calculate the order M model for a given M, where we can randomly draw all firms, and then we calculate the same order M, where one specific firm are never allowed to be randomly drawn. So it's completely removed from the model. And then we look at the difference between the average efficiency scores in the two order M models and calculate the Cook's distance based on this. So all the firms have Cook's distance. Here I've just reported the maximum one. So in reality, there should be observations all the way below here. I've just taken the maximum. And the great thing about the Cook distance is that here we actually have a literature that is used a lot in statistic, and we also have some rules of thumb for cutoff values. They are not really great, the rules of thumbs, but at least we know them and they are commonly used. So what we see here is the Cook's distance for high M. The maximum Cook's distance is 0.08, and then it is get lower and lower, and we have some cutoff value here following the Cook's distance literature, telling us that we should have M equal to around 20. So if we pick M equal to 20, no firms influence the frontier too much according to Cook's distance. So that could also be one way to go. Then the last one here is maybe the most academic one, but empirical it doesn't really work, but I think in theory it's quite nice. So here we exploit the same method which is used in SFA and Stoned and all these parametric models, where we try to split the residuals from a model between what is inefficiency and what is noise. So this is mostly called modified least square, but pretty much the same as SFA. So we try to use this same method, but instead of using it on a parametric model, we use it in order M. So I have tried to illustrate that here. We have the same figure as before. We have the black line out here is the DEA frontier. And then we have 4 different frontiers for different order M frontiers for different values of M. If we only have M equal to 1, meaning we only draw one firm at a time, that doesn't really make sense because the DA frontier in each iteration is quite strange. But we see when we take the average, it's actually quite nice, but really low. More interesting is the red one here, M equal to 3, so really low M. But what we find is that this is actually the cost function that have the lowest root mean squares. So this is the best fit for all the firms if we follow the ordinary least square idea, which will give us the best fit. So following this literature of splitting the residuals in inefficiency and noise, we can look at this red frontier, our best fit, and then we calculate the residuals to the red frontier. And then we use method of moments to split up all these residuals into inefficiency and noise. So now we have actually calculated the amount of noise in the model. And what the literature tells us is that we can now push the red frontier upwards by the average inefficiency. So the idea is we remove the inefficiency for this best fit, we make the best fit efficient, and push it upwards. Now, the empirical problem comes here because we need to assume how we distribute the inefficiency, whether it is half normal distributed or exponential distributed, and it makes a huge impact. If it is exponential distribution, we have this yellow frontier here. So this is that we push up the red frontier with an exponential distribution, and the blue one is the half normal distribution. So we see quite a big difference whether we choose one or the other assumption, and we cannot really state which assumption we should use. So it's quite uncertain empirical, but theoretical, this would be a nice way of choosing M, we think. So maybe someone else can use it. And we will also try again next year for a different data set. Okay, I think.
Yeah, sorry, can you wrap up in a minute, if that's okay? Can you wrap up in a minute? Yeah, I think you've come to last slide, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I will just actually just skip that one and just tell you I'm finished with my benchmarking, final benchmarking method here. We use total controllable cost as inputs. And then we have this quite strange net volumes, OPEX net volume and CAPEX net volume as outputs. I don't have time to go into detail here, but it's just aggregated outputs. So we have a lot of different underlying outputs, how much water they deliver, how much they clean the water, how much they should transport the water in different areas, soil conditions, a lot of stuff. And we just use the statistic and standardized prices to aggregate all these before we put them into a DA model. So if we put all these outputs, different underlying outputs into a DA model, we will get really high efficiencies because we have overfitting problem. So we just put the weights prior to the DA model instead of putting the weights as shadow weights into a DA model. Okay, so we use an input-oriented model because we want them to reduce their cost. We want such that we can set the revenue cap equal to the efficient cost. And we use constant return to scale just because we already accounted for scale sizes in the way we aggregated these outputs. So it's not because we actually believe there's constant return to scale in the sector. It's just because we have already accounted for it. Okay, so that was me wrapping up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emil, for your presentation. I'm conscious that Tore had to leave in a few minutes, so we need to bring him on very soon. But are there any questions for Emil from the audience? Yes, please, yeah? We probably have time for just one question, so that could be the... Yeah. Can you introduce yourself and ask the question to Emil, please?
Hi, Emil. I'm Vipin from ISER Bhopal this side. So I have one doubt, like when you are trying to have a robust benchmarking approach, there can be two contradicting things. One is the loss of information, the other one is the contamination. Are we taking into account those components also while choosing the model? Like, that's what my question is.
I'm sorry, I didn't understood the question. Maybe you did, Sweeney?
I didn't understand the last part.
Okay, I got your point. Like this model will account for the outliers, kind of, to some extent. But when you are removing an observation based on the approach that you have proposed, there can be two contradicting things. One is loss of information. The other end, the contamination that can happen to the efficiency estimation by including the same observation in the, or retaining the observation in the model. So these are contradicting. So as a researcher, I will be confused whether I should go to avoid the contamination or I should keep the information and have a reliable result. So
yes.
I hope.
Thank you. I understand. Normally in DA, we think that the frontier is biased upwards, right? Because we believe we haven't really observed truly efficiency. We only have what we have observed. So maybe we haven't observed what is truly efficient. Therefore, normally we think that the frontier should actually be pushed upwards. So I agree this contradicts what we are trying to do here, where we say because of noise, the frontier should be pushed downwards. So there's two different elements pushing in each direction. As a regulator, first of all, I think I just think the noise should mean more. I believe you have more noise in the model than unexplained efficiency. Second of all, as a regulator, you need to be really careful, because if we put too high efficiency requirements on the water sector, they go bankruptcy and they cannot deliver water. They cannot keep investing in new pipes. So every time we do something as a regulator, we need to make sure we don't do too much. We will rather have the consumers to pay a little more money than too few money. Therefore, I put more weight on the noise element here than on the other bias.
Thank you, Emil. I hope that was clear. I think we have to move on to the next presentation because I think Tore only has a short window, our next speaker. But thank you so much, Emil, again, for joining us. That was very, very helpful. And of course, if any of you have questions, further questions, we can answer towards the end. We'll have about 30 minutes for Q&A towards the end. Thank you so much, Emil. I think you can take off your presentation, and of course you can dial off as well. We welcome our next speaker, Tore Langseth from the Norwegian Water Resources and Energy Directorate. Tore is a director with the NVE. The NVE was established in 1921, so they're over 100 years old. NVE has been a pioneer when it comes to incentive-based regulation in the energy sector, and they are known for experimenting with innovative ideas. Over to you, Tore. I'm so sorry there was quite a shift in the schedule. Can you stay with us for 20 minutes? Is that possible? Can you hear us, Tore?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I can. I will do this as fast as possible, but I can say.
Okay, as long as you have time. Yeah. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you in India, and good morning from here from Norway. We had our first snowfall this morning, so it was rather cold. I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to speak that much about the details about the model that we use, but more on how we apply the results from our DEA analysis in the regulation of the electricity distribution system operators in Norway. We have been using benchmarking for many years and for various purposes in the Norwegian energy network regulation. We started already in 1989 and with developing models that could estimate the economies of scale of the sector. Because we had more than 200 utilities, and there was an idea from the politicians that they want to merge them into 19 regional larger companies, and they will see how much could the society benefit from that. But that idea was left a couple of years later, and when the Energy Act was passed by the Parliament. And then we had a regulation that said that there should be competition in power production and supply of power, but from distribution should be monopoly that should be regulated. So we started with working on that already in 1991, developing a model that was taken into use from 1997, which is quite similar to the model that Emil told you about in his introduction. It's quite standard way of doing it. You have a revenue cap regulation for a 5 years period where you had a cost base, which is actually the company's actual costs that is fixed for 5 years, but adjusted annually by inflation. We used the CPI indicator of inflation, and then it was adjusted for some increase in the energy delivered through the grid to account for the need for enforcing the grid. And then there was an efficiency factor X, which we had two components, one general, which was applied to every company, and then a company-specific one that we used DEA to set. But before that, we worked several years with developing models, looking into other options than DEA, like SFA, but we ended up with using DEA. And then we used quite a lot of years to establishing a data collection systems and a validation system, so we can ensure that the data that we put into our models it's okay. So in that period from 1997 to 2006, we had this 5 years regulatory period. Cost base was fixed every 5 year, and the benchmarking was done every 5 years. And in between, nothing really happened, just for adjusting for these annual factors. From 2007, we changed our regulatory model quite a lot. And then now we are determining something that we call the cost norms when setting the individual revenue caps, and we'll come back to what the cost norms are. But in general, it's what should the cost be of an average efficient utility, which is similar to yours. That is what the cost norms are trying to mimic. And from 2007, we have updated the cost base every year, and we also do the benchmarking every year to update the cost norms. And the reason why we did that is because there was expected to be a lot of investments, and then there will be a problem that it took 5 years or up to 7 years actually before your investments will come into the cost base. And that will not give a reasonable return on the investments over the lifetime. So in the very simple way, the revenue cap consists of 2 elements: cost base, which is the cost of the companies, and the cost norm, which is fixed by us, and where we are using benchmarking to set the cost norms. And then there's a weight. This Greek letter rho is the weight that we put on the cost norms. And if you have this model, you can say if the rho is 0, you have just a pure cost plus regulation. If you set it to 1, then you will have a pure yardstick competition model, which means that your revenue cap will be determined by 100% by something independent of your own costs. So the strengths of the incentives, of course, if you have a cost plus, there's no incentives for efficiency. If you have a 100% weight of the cost norm, you have very, very strong incentives for efficiency, because every dollar that you can save will go into your own pocket. So the strength of the regulation is determined by the size of the rho. And from the first 2 years, we have a 50-50 weight on the 2 elements. And from 2009 until 2023, we had a 60% weight of the cost norms and 40 on the cost base. And from 2023, we turned a little bit more. So we are now up to 70-30. The rather strong incentives for efficiency. So in this very simple form, the revenue caps is determined 30% of the cost base, which is the utility's own costs, and 70% of the cost norms, which is determined by us using benchmarking, and DEA is the method that we use. So what is the cost base that we are using? Well, it's operating and maintenance costs, and then it's network losses, which is the actual technical losses that happens in the grid when you transform, because if there's resistance in the lines and cables, which means that you have to feed in more energy into the lines than the end users take out, and the loss in the lines has to be purchased by the distribution network operators. And then we have something that is not the cost of the companies itself, but it's the cost that the customers have when there is an interruption in the supply. So we call this cost of energy not supplied, which is, if you are more familiar with the wording of value of lost load, it's actually when there's an outage, we will calculate how much does this cost the society. And that is treated as the company's own costs. And when you see we include it in the cost base, well, the revenue caps will be higher, of course. But then when we come to practical regulation, when we every year when we set the revenue caps, if you have an interruption in the supply, we will calculate how much that was for the consumers, and we will subtract it from your revenue cap. So that means that if you in your cost base and in the cost norms, which also have a sense element, if you have a value of lost load or cost of energy not supplied, which is lower than which is put into your revenue caps, you will benefit from it. But if you have a higher value of the cost of energy not supplied, you will lose money. So that is to incentivize to have a good reliability, taking into consideration that it will take it will cost money to increase the reliability. And when we internalize the costs here, they will weigh what is the cost of the society of having an interruption compared to the increased O&M cost, network losses and depreciations and return on assets and so on, the costs of the company to avoid them because they have to make investments or use more money on operations and maintenance to reduce the losses, the cost of energy not supplied. So these elements plus the cost of capital, which is the depreciations and the return on capital, we use a standard weighted average cost of capital model and multiply it with the regulatory asset base, which is the book value of the assets. And these 5 elements is what we call the cost base. So this is that we put 30% weight of this, and then we have the cost norm, which is 70%. But we are benchmarking exactly the same elements in that benchmarking study. We use data envelopment analysis. I will not go very much into detail, but say a few words about it. We have used a constant returns to scale model, not because we think that the technology is constant returns to scale, but to incentivize mergers and acquisitions in the distribution sector, because we used to have 200 utilities, and that is quite a lot when you have only 3.5 million consumers. So the smallest have 300 customers and the largest has 900,000. So to incentivize them to mergers and acquisitions, we use the constant returns to scale model. And the number of companies or utilities has been reduced from 200 to around 80 over the years. We have 2 models, one for the local DSOs, which is the companies with the smaller lines, which is connected to the house and buildings and so on. And another one for the regional DSOs, which are higher voltage levels and transport the electricity throughout a larger region, which is mainly have this local distribution companies as the consumers. There's a rather few consumers and a few generators that is connected to the regional grid. And then we have a third level, which is transmission, which is connecting the regions together. But we have the local DSOs have 3 outputs: the number of customers, which is an exogenous variable, and then you have number of kilometers with HV lines and number of substations, which is endogenous. But it's a better proxy than most other alternatives. But we are working on this in a longer term to avoid having such endogenous variables. But that will come later. For the regional DSOs, we have 4 outputs. It's overhead lines and underground cables, subsea cables, and transformer and switching stations. But actually, we have hundreds of outputs there, because within the overhead lines, we have many different types of overhead lines with different capacities and so on, and they are different costs related to them, and this is weighted together. So we have a prefixed weight systems which weight together different network components until up to these 4 outputs. And then the frontier that we use here is not actually we do this annually for all the companies, but the frontier is consists of, it's an average frontier based on the costs and outputs, average costs and outputs over a 5-year period. And that is to take out stochastic variations from year to year, which is likely will occur in this sector, to get the frontier more stable. It's a rolling 5 years average, which means that actually a unit that will be efficient in a 1-year model also will be measured against a frontier, where they also can be their own peers. So that was a quite simple models, but Norway is a country with huge differences between different regions. So we have also we are adjusting the results from the first step here, adjusting for environmental factors based on geographical information systems. We have mapped where all the lines goes in all over Norway, and then we will see how is the different geographical factors where you have lines. For example, for the local DSOs, we have what we call coniferous and mixed forest with a high grow rate, and see how big part of your grid goes through that area. And that is because trees are one of the most important factors that drive the cost, because one, they have to cut trees very often, and it costs a lot of money. And second, the trees fall over the lines when in bad weather. And then we have some compound geographical factors with deciduous forest with high grow rate and feed in of local generation, terrain and slope where the grid goes, and something called snow sticking to trees. And that is something that occurs when the temperature is at a different level and it comes snow, and it sticks to the trees, and that makes the trees very heavy, and they break and fall over the lines. This is typically something that happens in the western part of Norway. And then we have, well, the first one is something that is more in the eastern part of Norway. And the third factor there is strong wind and saline air, which is something that occurs along the coastline. We have a very, very long coastline, and salt in the air will make corrosion on the lines, makes them last a shorter time. And then we have something called grid on the water. This is something that is more or less along whole coastline. And the last factor is snow and low temperatures and strong wind, which is something that occurs very a lot in the northern part of Norway. And for the regional DSOs, there's no factors. We have examined more than 100 different variables. We ended up with this in the local DSOs and none in the regional grid. We spent a couple of years to find out which factors should be used, working together with the industry to find out what kind of environmental factors would likely impact your costs. And then we will also see if this is done in a significant way by doing some regression. And this is a kind of two-step DEA model, which is not theoretically correct, but we think that it's a better way of doing it and trying to include all the environmental factors into the DEA model, because we will then think the result will be very wrong. We are not doing this in a standard way, so we are regressioning the results against these geographical factors itself, but we are regressing the difference in the result between the results against the difference in environmental factors compared to the environmental factors that your peers have. So that's quite different from what is used in other studies. So this cost norm is a three-step ladder. The first one is calculating the efficiency scores using DEA. And the second step is that we adjust the DEA scores for environmental factors using regression. And the third step is to calibrate the results from step 2 and estimate the cost norm. And the way we are doing it is that, let's say that the average cost, the average efficiency is 80%. We will adjust all the factors with 20% so that the average is 100 and the 100 is 120 and so on. And the reason why we are doing this is that we have that the cost norm is equal to the cost base for an average efficient unit, which means that an average efficient unit will have a return on the assets which is the same as the weighted average cost of capital. And that is what is quite similar to competitive business. There are efficient and inefficient units, but the WACC is the average return on assets that they will have. It's not the return on assets for the most efficient one, it's for the average one. And in doing this, we will also ensure that those utilities that are more efficient than the average will have a high return. They will be incentivized to reduce the costs because they can have a high return on the assets than the other ones. Whilst those which is less efficient, they will have a lower return than the WACC. And since this is a kind of average frontier we put in there and sit to fix the norm, we could use actually any method, but it's for practical reasons we are using DEA because that is one method that is more controllable. Since the changes from year to year is less than we will normally have with a SFA model. Just to see, we haven't done this for many years. And a couple of words about why how we work. We ensure to have enough capacities for setting the annual revenue caps and amending the existing models. And since we are doing this every year, it's very well known why the data. And one of the benefits of doing it every year is that any changes in the data and the behavior of the data and reporting of the data will be cashed up by the people that work with it, and they will very easily find if something is wrong. And then they can simulate a lot of things in the models so we ensure that the models is robust, and we need to have enough capacity to do that. We use external capacities when necessary for exploring new methods or models. We are going to explore new things and don't have the in-house capacities ourselves. And we have ensured that data of high quality in all relevant areas. We put a lot of effort into controlling the data that comes in. There's 6 people sitting there for 3 months just to scrutinize the data, which they are quite familiar with, working with those data for many years. And we are very, I think it's very important to ensure the transparency in all areas. We have stakeholder involvements in everything that we do, which doesn't mean that they will be with us all the way until we make decisions. But when we are exploring things, we are working very close to the utilities to find out what works and what doesn't work, and to get as much ideas on what we should look for and explore and such. And then when we are getting close to a decision, we will take them out of the line, and then we will make our decisions based on our own groundings. And then all the data that we are using, which is quite a lot, is published. You can download it by APIs as data for many years. And we have, even though the model that I showed you looks very simple, it's a lot of nitty-gritty things there, and there's we use R to calculate the revenue caps, and there's something like 1,200 lines of codes using a benchmarking package which is already in DEA, developed in R. There's a lot of nitty-gritty things in there, and the codes we publish it's on our websites, including a user guide to explore what can you change and where do you change and something, and also how you can install R on your computers. So we think that 100% transparency in everything that we do, and we think that is a good idea, because if someone could use the data and come up with a better model than we have, we will be happy. But so far, no one has done. So that was what I had.
Thank you so much, Tore. Very insightful as always. So, yeah, can we give a round of applause to Tore? And thank you so much for finishing on time and staying with us. Even though we kind of well past your time window. Do we have any questions from the audience for Tore, including online attendees? Oh, yeah, sorry, question from Emmanuel or an observation?
Not so much a question, it's just that I had a presentation. Can you hear me? No? The mic is not. Hello? Yeah. Sorry, Tore, I just wanted to say I made a presentation this morning, and I had a section for Norway. But then I was running out of time, so I said you'll hear it all directly from the man himself. Just I think only one sort of thing about, because it's something I've read before, about this thing where you ascribe costs to electricity not delivered. And how do you assess the value of that to the consumers, and could it vary by type of consumer?
Yes, I'd say that is a huge work to estimate the value of lost load, and we have several cost functions for that. Which we have developed over, well, we started also that in the 1980s, actually. And that has been developed through large research and development studies, updated from year to year. Is remarkable stable over time. It's increasing, of course, because of our dependencies of the energy is increasing.
Sorry, please carry on, yeah.
Yeah, and but it's a cost functions, and they are for various types of consumers. Like we have one for households, one for smaller industry, one for heavy industry, energy intensive industries, and so on. So it's a model that was developed by the industry itself many years in the 1980s, which we adopted and refined and put into cost functions.
I think we have to move to the next speaker who is online, but thank you again, Tori, for being with us. That was very insightful. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions later on. We'll have time for them later. Yeah.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thank you, Tori. So we have the next speaker, Daniel Mitchell. Daniel, if you can switch on your video and probably share your screen. I hope you can hear me. You're on mute, Daniel. Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, thank you. We can see you. We can hear you. Apologies, we've been delayed. We've been like shifting every session by 15 minutes or so. I hope you can stay with us for another 20-25 minutes if you can, Daniel. Appreciate you're very busy. So Daniel is the head of cost assessment at Ofwat, the England and Wales water regulator. Daniel has been a consultant before he joined Ofwat, and he has advised several regulators and companies in his work. He is currently spearheading, overseeing one of the most complex benchmarking exercises ever in the England and Wales water sector, which is undergoing a huge transformation. Thanks for joining us, Daniel, and over to you.
Thanks, Srini, and great to meet you all virtually, at least. I'll spend the next 20 minutes just presenting a few slides, setting out sort of why we regulate, how regulation has evolved over time, and then sort of what we've been looking at for the most recent price review, looking at the next 5 years. Just a bit of background, I won't go over this again, but yeah, I've currently leading on base cost assessment at PR24, which I'll speak about in a bit longer. And before that, I was at SEPA for 6 years, covering price reviews across different utility sectors in the UK and abroad. So who do we regulate? So we regulate in England and Wales 17 water and wastewater companies, and these vary both in size, demographics, and complexity. The sector was privatised in 1989 along with other utilities in England and Wales. And there's 11 companies that provide water and wastewater services, and then there's 6 companies which only provide water services. And over time, this has sort of whittled down to 17 companies over time. Since privatisation, there's been various mergers that have happened, which has condensed the number of companies. And the map on the right-hand side shows how they're sort of demographically located across the region, across England and Wales. And you can sort of see there that I've sort of brought out 2 examples in the bullet. So Thames Water, they're the largest water company. They provide water services to only over 4 million properties. They maintain over 32,000 kilometres of water mains. And then they treat 92% of their water using very complex treatment processes. And on the other hand, Ports of Water provide water services to only around 325,000 properties and maintain only 3,400 kilometres of water mains. So it shows the variety of water companies we have to regulate, and we have to take that into account in our approaches to assessing cost efficiency. On the bottom left-hand side there, for those who aren't so familiar with water and wastewater services, so it starts off on the left-hand side, so where we abstract the water from. So that may be from a river, that may be from a reservoir, that may be from an underground borehole. That water then gets transported to the water treatment works, and that's where the water gets made safe for human consumption. So there's various treatment that goes on to enable that, using chemicals, etc., different treatment processes. And then once that water is treated, it's then transported to the water company through the network, through water mains. Then on the right-hand side, we've got the wastewater element. So we start with collecting the wastewater from the customers and from businesses. That then gets treated at sewage treatment works. And what we mean by treated, we mean it gets separated into 2 components. The sludge component gets taken off to the sludge treatment centre for separate treatment, and then the wastewater, the sewage, then gets treated so that it removes all of the nasty nutrients before getting released back into the environment. And then the sludge gets treated through various methods, some of which can generate electricity. So why regulate? So similar to what Tori was just talking about in Norway, customers in England and Wales don't have a choice of what water company they use to produce their water. So if we don't regulate, or we don't don't determine what companies can charge customers, or don't try and incentivize the companies to provide good levels of service, then they might take advantage of customers by charging higher than they need to, or providing good levels of service. And we're the economic regulator. On this slide here, it shows where we fit into the whole landscape. So we're one of multiple stakeholders looking in this space. So we have the governments at the top for England and Wales who set the overall policy framework of what we are the economic regulator in England and Wales. We're a separate regulator in Scotland. We've got the Environment Agency that regulates water quality and resources in England and manages risk flooding. We've got the equivalent in Wales, Natural Resources Wales. And then we've got the Drinking Water Inspectorate that regulates drinking water quality. And then under that, we have the Competition and Markets Authority, where if in every price review, which happens every 5 years, if the water company or water companies disagree with some of our decisions, then they can appeal those decisions to the Competition and Markets Authority. And that process tends to take around 6 to 12 months to come to a final view. We have the Consumer Council for Water, who represents household and non-household consumers. They are important because otherwise, when you go through these sort of consultation processes, sometimes the loudest voices in the room tend to be the water companies. So the Consumer Council for Water help to provide more of a customer perspective. And then we have the market operator, who looks at non-household retail. But the price review, which happens every 5 years, where the water companies submit their business plans to us on what they're going to deliver over the next 5 years for customers in the environment. That is only one piece of the puzzle. So we regulate in other ways. We do policy development continuously. We provide funding for water companies to innovate. We can take enforcement action if water companies fail to meet their duties. And then we continually engage with customers and wider stakeholders, including government, on how water companies are performing. So just turning to the price review. So the price review happens every 5 years. As Srini mentioned, we're currently in price review 2024. And this looks to set expenditure allowances, revenue allowances for the next 5 years from 25, 26, 29, 30. We also set the output targets. So what are the performance levels which companies should be delivering with those expenditure allowances? And then we also set the weighted average cost of capital. So what's the return on investment investors in water companies should be expected to get? And these three pieces of the puzzle are typical building blocks of a price review, and these all fit together to set the overall package. What I should say here is, I'll just go back here. So while customers don't have choice generally for the water services they receive, some elements of the value chain do have competition. And this is where perhaps the upfront fixed costs maybe aren't as big, so there's not as much gains from economies of scale. And these are largely in the sludge side, the bioresources market, where there's currently a market for trading sludge between different providers. And on retail too, on business retail, business customers do have a choice of who provides their water services, business retail services. So the focus I was going to focus on today was how we've set expenditure allowances for PR24 and previous price reviews. So why do we assess these? So one, as I said, customers don't have a choice. So we want to use benchmarking and other methods to try and simulate competitive markets, recognizing that in perfect competition helps to drive down prices and make sure that customers don't overpay. But obviously in a natural monopoly, we don't have that luxury. We want to protect customers for that reason. And we want to provide sufficient funding so that companies provide an appropriate and sufficient level of investment to maintain a resilient services. So we do this through both ex ante methods and ex post. So we look ahead of the price review. We use cost assessment. We use benchmarking. We compare between companies to sort of work out, well, why can one company deliver services for lower cost than other companies? We've also used business plan incentives to encourage water companies to submit stretching bids. And then ex post, so after we've set the revenue allowances, we also use different tools to try and encourage companies to deliver efficiency savings in period as well. So that's through cost sharing, where if a company delivers on its output, so it delivers all the commitments it's committed to customers in terms of performance. That might be water supply interruptions, that might be the volume of pollution incidents, but it also is able to find cost savings by underspending on its allowance, and it can retain part of those cost savings through the cost sharing mechanism. So the toolkit we use in the price review to set efficient allowances is threefold, really. So the first is benchmarking analysis, where unlike what Tori was just talking about in Norway, we've tended in the UK, not just in the water sector, but in other sectors, to focus on using parametric econometric analysis, where we look at explaining variations in efficient costs between companies, given various different factors, that mostly factors which are outside of company control. So that might be scale, the size of the company, that might be population density, that might be water treatment complexity, that might be network topography, recognizing that companies that operate in high hilly terrains have to pump more water than other companies. And benchmarking is really important in regulation because it helps to overcome information asymmetry, where the water companies know much more about the business than us. So they might not always be incentivized to reveal their cost efficiencies or their actual costs. So benchmarking helps to unveil that information for us. And because we have 17 water companies, it's obviously one of the strongest elements of regulation we have, particularly when you compare that to the energy sector in England and Wales, that have much fewer comparators. We complement our benchmarking analysis with bespoke engineering assessments of deep dive business cases. So say a company is going to enhance the level of service that the water company provides, then we'll do some deep dives of that. And then when the benchmarking analysis is unable to capture certain characteristics, then the companies can submit cost adjustment claims to us as part of the process to say, why does it cost us more than other companies to deliver water and wastewater services, or why are costs in the future different to in the past due to climate change or other factors, which mean that costs going forward are likely to be more expensive than the costs they have incurred previously. Given time, I won't go over that, but I'll circulate these slides after, which just shows sort of how the approach has evolved over time. Looking at PR24, so I won't go over again, but it's sort of been threefold. So we sort of look at the base cost, which is the ongoing costs that companies incur to maintain a resilient networks that combines operating expenditure and capital maintenance expenditure. To assess this, which is what the area I lead on, it's threefold. So we've got the benchmarking models on the left-hand side, where we estimate the models using historical data, using random effects estimation, and we triangulate across models of different levels of cost aggregation and with different drivers to mitigate the risk of error in any one model. We've then got the cost adjustment claim process, which I've talked about, and then we also assess a small number of other costs separately as well. Similar to what Tori mentioned in Norway, the approach has been developed through a very strong consultation process with the sector, going all the way back to 2021, where we engaged quite constructively with the sector on how we can improve on our approach. And we're moving towards publishing our final determinations in December. And apologies, you might be able to hear some fire alarm in the background. Hopefully it's not too noisy.
Hopefully that's a drill and you don't need to.
Yeah, it's only a drill. It's okay. Just touching on the principles of how we've set base cost allowances. So we want to make sure the data is good quality. We want to make sure that the outcome is consistent with engineering, operational, economic rationale. We want to make sure that it's sensibly simple and transparent, so we can understand, so the regulator can understand, so the water companies can understand, but also that wider stakeholders, including customer groups, can understand what the outcome of the analysis is. We also want the models to be robust. We want to be able to set a stretching but achievable cost efficiency challenge. And then we obviously want a coherent cost assessment approach, which drives the right incentives and behaviours. On the bottom left-hand side there, you sort of show the levels of disaggregation we use. So I mentioned earlier that we try and triangulate across various different models at different levels of cost aggregation to mitigate the risk of error in any one model and to enable us to capture a wider range of cost drivers. And this was a key feedback from one of the appeals to the Competition and Markets Authority in the previous price review, which we've taken on board. On the top of there, that just shows one of the examples of one of the cost functions we use to assess efficient costs in water. So as I mentioned earlier, you've got scale. So the estimated coefficient is close to 1, which assumes sort of constant returns to scale. You've got a variable which tries to capture network topography, recognizing that some companies have to pump more water to customers and use more energy, consume more energy to pump water than other companies due to where they are located in England and Wales. You then got population density. A lot of companies in densely populated areas, such as Thames Water in London, argue that because they operate in densely populated areas, it's more complicated for them to do capital maintenance. For example, if they have to replace a water main, they have to engage with other utilities, they have to close the road, they have to engage with local authorities to get the right permissions to be able to put up temporary traffic lights, etc. And then we have treatment complexity, because depending on the different types of water each company use, then they might need to treat the water at different levels of complexity to make it safe for human consumption. So for example, if the water is taken from below ground at a borehole, that water tends to be very good quality, almost at drinking water quality. Whereas if the water has been taken from a river, naturally that will require a lot more extensive treatment to make it safe for human consumption. And then to assess model robustness, it's similar to what you would do in any typical econometric study. Really, we look at whether the estimated coefficients are the right sign, plausible magnitude, can they accurately predict efficient expenditure of companies? So for example, we look at efficiency scores. So how do the model predicted costs compared to what companies have been spending historically? If there's a large range of efficiency scores, then that might indicate that we're missing some factors from the models. We also assess the models against various statistical diagnostic tests. And then we also compare what we've allowed to what companies have spent historically, and also what they're forecasting to spend in their business plans, just to make sure that our allowances stand up to scrutiny. Won't go over this, but again, this goes over the cost assessment claim process. And for PR24, we've evolved our approach somewhat, recognizing that future's not always the same as the past. And we've introduced 5 sector-wide cost adjustments in relation to water mains renewals, meter replacements, phosphorus removal, net zero, and energy costs. And going forward, we expect this is going to form a more important part of our framework. How do we set the catch-up-efficiency challenge? And by catch-up-efficiency challenge, I mean all companies are not operating at the same levels of efficiency. Some are more efficient than others. We could assume that every company has to incur costs with the most efficient company in the sector, the leading company, but we recognise that no model is perfect. We can't capture all cost drivers, so we mitigate that a bit by lowering the catch-up challenge from the leading company all the way down to the upper quartile company, which in water is a 5th place company, and we base that on the last 5 years, recognising that if you sometimes base it on a single year, one that might not be a typical year due to various reasons. Maybe there was loads of storms, severe weather, which meant companies had to incur more operating costs than normal. Or equally, if you base it on the last year, that can sometimes drive some perverse incentives to sort of either reduce spending that year or even overspend in that year in some cases. So when we pull together the base allowances and what we call enhancement allowances, where enhancement allowances is investment to enhance the level of service, this produces what we've allowed at the price review. And as Srini alluded to, this is by far the largest price review we've had on record. We're funding investment at up to £91 billion in our draft determinations, and that is subject to change. If you compare that to our previous price review, our allowances are 50% increase on before, so it represents the largest investment programme since privatisation. So you can sort of see the enormity of the task we've faced. as we go on to future price views, this isn't a one-off. This is going to continue. This level of investment is likely to continue going forward. So we need to continue to improve on our approach. And one of the key areas we're looking at for next price view is, well, what do base allowances actually fund in terms of capital maintenance, in terms of asset renewals? How can we ensure that companies are encouraged to deliver the right amount of renewals for the long term, so they don't just undertake short-term solutions to earn short-term rewards? And we'll be starting that work proactively once the fund determinations finally come out in December. So I'll stop there and open for any questions. So thank you very much for your time.
Hey, thank you so much, Daniel. That was incredible level of detail. And as you know, Ofwat is one of the regulators everyone looks up to, given the history of regulation. Very helpful. Thank you so much. Any questions from the audience, including online delegates? Any questions for Daniel? Yeah. Okay, maybe we start with your question, Emmanuel.
I also have a question, Srini, when you have a moment. Yeah. No, go ahead, Emmanuel. Yeah.
That's okay. Sorry, I didn't see you. Okay, well, let's start with Emmanuel, and then we'll come to you, Chanel.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Thanks for your presentation, Daniel.
No problem.
The other regulators particularly the ones that are using DEA, have adopted an incentivization approach somewhere in their methodology, whereby, for example, they use super efficiency so that a company, an operator, is encouraged to be super efficient in a sense, because then their allowance is going to be higher than it might otherwise have been, as a way of incentivizing them. Has that debate taken place in Ofwat? And if so, what has been the decision around?
That's a good question. I mean, I'd say that's probably exactly what we do in Ofwat as well. I probably just didn't bring that out. So because we set the benchmark at the upper quartile firm, the fifth place company, we do allow companies to receive an allowance which is higher than what they've requested or higher what they've spent historically. So, for example, a good example of that is ports of water that are typically identified as being one of the more efficient water companies, and typically receive a revenue cost allowance which is higher than what they've been spending historically, but also what they've put in their business plan to try and encourage them to drive efficiencies going forward, so to drive the sort of behaviours you just mentioned.
Yeah, and there are also other ways through which Ofwat kind of recognizes and rewards ambitious business plans. So they have this business plan assessment, and then they rate companies based on ambition, quality, and so on. So there are softer ways, like non-financial as well as financial ways, through which they recognize those efforts to drive the frontier. Professor Lalwani?
Yes, thank you very much, Srini. Just a quick one on actually what is happening in the United Kingdom at the moment. As you said, that this is the difficult time for water companies. I just wanted to ask Daniel that what's his view in terms of working with Ofwat on Thames Water. They are in real trouble, as all we know. And I was wondering whether Ofwat did look at their business plan, as you put it, or any other things which they noticed in their assessment. And also how they are linked with DWI, because in terms of drinking quality water, they are responsible to also look into that in detail. How they link up with Ofwat. So those are the two things. Interesting to know what working with Ofwat since 2021 still. What's your view on it?
Sorry to put you on the spot, Daniel.
No, that's okay. Thanks for the question. All companies submit business plans to us as part of the price review process, and we look at those in great levels of scrutiny. And perhaps Thames Water more so than any other company. It's been widely documented that they're in a sort of turnaround regime at the moment. We recognise that things need to improve, We're hoping that will happen in the short to immediate term. But that's probably all I can say. I'm probably not the right person to speak to, but there's definitely, we recognise things need to improve, and there's plans in place to make that happen over the next 5 years. In terms of the DWI, so in terms, we do work very closely with both the Drinking Water Inspectorate and the Environment Agency. And when we talk, I didn't refer to it much in the presentation today, but when we look to the enhancement allowances, so enhancement is when we set expenditure allowances to drive improvements in the level of service beyond what's currently being achieved. Now, that a lot of that investment is driven by requirements set by the Drinking Water Inspector and by the Environment Agency. So when the investment programs come to us, we assess the cost efficiency, but the need for that investment has already been decided through the long-term planning frameworks, which are supported by both Drinking Water Inspector and the Environment Agency.
Yes, thank you very much. I was just reading the newspaper yesterday, The Guardian. There's an article. Now this cyber security has been brought up, the way it's affecting, Thames Water and DWI as well. So one thing or other.
Yeah, cybersecurity is another area which is one of the key investment areas of this policy as well. Has perhaps gone a bit more under the radar, but there's definitely one of the more material enhancement investment areas for this policy.
Okay, thank you very much for explaining.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you, Professor Lalwani. I think, yeah, so I think we should stop here. And I mean, Daniel, thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. I think we've managed to catch up a bit, the delay we had at the beginning. We should probably, I'm looking to Ali here, we should probably take a 15-minute break so people can stretch their legs. Oh, of course. Sorry. Professor Anup Singh just reminded me he had to leave. So can we wait for 15 minutes for your tea break? And I think, over to Professor Anup Singh, who is as I think many of you know, he's a professor of management sciences with IIT Kanpur. He's had extensive experience in terms of regulation. I'd be very interested in understanding from Professor Singh in terms of the extent of economic regulation in India, and especially how mature the sector is and the use of economics in regulation in India. Thank you, Professor.
I'll try not to hold everybody from tea for a very long time. So I don't really have a PPT as such, but I did try to fill in some space on the white slides so that we have. It's not okay? Yeah, it's working, yeah. So that we have something at least to munch on. As Srini just mentioned, that we have been working with the regulatory institutions in India, both at the federal level as well as the state level. So IIT Kanpur has set up a Center for Energy Regulation, which works in the domain of regulatory research, the institutional capacity building. And in that context, we have been there for almost 20 years now. And I can say the center is now very well recognized in the policy and regulatory circles. We interact very closely with the ministries as well as the regulatory institutions in developing essentially new kinds of regulatory frameworks and how to make improvement in the existing ones. We also have an Energy Analytics Lab, which deals mostly with the regulatory affairs related to the power system operation and power markets. And of course, it works with a lot of data in terms of energy modeling and analytics. Okay, moving on, just give you a very quick glimpse of what is happening in the power sector. The power sector was regulated through these three acts, even after post-independence. So we had a Pre-Independence Act of 1910, then we had another act of 1948, and then there was a regulatory reforms that phase that started in 1995 from Odisha and then to Haryana and Andhra Pradesh and then to many more states. And I happened to actually work with one of the regulatory commissions myself before joining IIT Kanpur. So that made me essentially try to marry in the academic knowledge that we have earned in variety of spheres, and how do you put in regulation, apply to regulation in practice. Let me be upfront in saying that it's not that I have been successful all the way with the regulatory institutions in trying to convince them to accept all kinds of such applications. But nevertheless, there have been changes which have been brought about. For those who are not initiated into the power sector the way it works in India, well, we used to have the vertically integrated state electricity boards. That was a very, very long time back. We had this electricity supply, which will happen from the generating stations known by the central sector entities like NTPC and HPC, or the state level entities, the state level generating companies, the captive power plants, the IPPs. And then, of course, you had the transmission network, which will take the power through the big wires, and then will take to these smaller wires to the distribution network and finally to the consumers. So post-reform, as we have witnessed everywhere across the world, the sector was unbundled into generation, transmission, and distribution. The key difference here with the UK is that UK, you still have licensing for the generation. In Indian context, the licensing has been removed from the generation. We do have licensing for the transmission as well as for the distribution system. We also have a trading license. Now, the important thing is, where is it that the regulator enters into picture and what exactly it is regulating? So one of the key things it does, it is regulating the licensing, the business of operating in the sector. Even though the generation is not licensed as such when you want to set up a power plant, but when you need to operate that power plant, you are actually regulated through a number of rules and codes. So in terms of deviations that you will do, in terms of grid codes that you need to follow, and in which way you will essentially meet the variety of technical and operational requirements of the sector. However, in case of transmission, so it's essentially for a load serving entity which is dealing with the consumers, the final end consumers, they are essentially procuring power from these generation companies. They might be procuring power through a mechanism which is called as long-term power purchase agreements. So roughly you can say about 85% of the power which is procured in India currently is through the long-term PPA routes. About 15% is happening through the power markets. Primarily, one of them is the power exchange, other is through the traders. Now, the power procurement business is regulated business, but at what price this electricity will be sold from the generation to the distribution companies is regulated by the regulatory institutions, either at the federal level or at the state level, under what is called as Section 62 of the Act, of the Electricity Act 2003. Now, this act essentially defines, it doesn't say about which principles you apply. That is left to the regulators. But the kind of principles we have currently is what we can call as normative cost of service approach. So it's not strictly cost of service, which we had perhaps very, very long time back, but now it's normative cost of service approach. So as soon as we say we use the word normative, this means there are some norms. There are some norms that has to be fixed by the regulator. So now the question comes, what is the basis on which the regulator will fix those norms? And this is precisely the debate we have been having with the regulatory institutions. The way you have been fixing the norms is not really economically efficient, and we have been suggesting this all the way along. In fact, over the last 20 years, I have given inputs to over 150 regulatory documents and policy documents, and perhaps maybe I'll say 20% of them all about tariff fixation. And one of the key elements which has been there in most of the cases that are we able to really provide a regulatory framework which gives efficient incentives so that the people are able to achieve those benchmarks? And then, of course, there is a compliance mechanism also for the same. In doing so, it has been I'll say, nth attempt in convincing the regulatory institutions. And I recall this was probably about 15 years back. I met Secretary Power at that time. Mr. Shahi was there. I told him, look, you have this accelerated power development program, and you fix this, targets for efficiency, for network losses and other things. And these are essentially more or less the same for everybody. I said, why do you have the same? One distribution company is like a urban centric, which is like maybe, say in Delhi or in maybe Mumbai or Surat. And other one is a very large area, for example, UP. So can you give the same efficiency really parameter for both of them? One of them has maybe large consumer base, which are high paying, and some other entity has a lot of agriculture consumers or domestic consumers. So shouldn't you be operating with some kind of a framework for setting those targets, which takes into account some of these sort of quote unquote uncontrollable factors, which are inherited. They can't really, get away from that. So I did make a presentation, in fact, let me be frank about it, at the ministry. And there were officials which were called from two of the central sector entities who were partly involved with the ministry in designing this APDRP program. I had the DEA results with me, and I did the estimates for the efficiency benchmarks for the electricity distribution companies. And well, it was presented to a set of engineers, unfortunately. And I also happened to be an engineer turned into economist, I don't know what now. And frankly, I can tell you the economics didn't make sense there at the other side of the table. So it didn't really work there. But I did try to present to the engineer. And I must tell you that for engineers, learning economics is must. This is very, very important. You will agree, right? Yeah. Yes. But I couldn't do it at that point of time. So till very recently, essentially, when the central regulator asked us to design a new form of regulation for the tariff determination, because they have been doing something, they said, we want to have a new principle. So tell us what kind of new principles we should have now, what kind of framework we should have. So we worked on that. We presented that, but at the same time, we also nudged them to some extent, saying that you use these different parameters at times which go into the tariff making. So let me just bring that quickly with you. What are those parameters? I had already talked about that. So essentially in tariff, you have the capacity and the energy charges. So as far as the generation tariff is concerned, on the capacity charges, you have O&M expenses, which has room for efficiency. And this is where you can push them. For depreciation, well, this is legally given their number. You can't do much about it. Loan, you have 70-30 normative ratio interest. You are linking it from markets. So not much you can do. It's out of control. Same is on, to some extent, working capital. You can do a little bit. ROEs, regulators, sort of meter that it controls. But on the energy side, you have basically the fuel cost. But two important parameters which enter that fuel cost, essentially auxiliary consumption and station heat rate. Basically, the thermal efficiency of the power plant and the amount of electricity it consumes to operate on its own. So these are the three areas where this benchmarking can be done, and we had suggested. In one of them, I used this figure, which I recently made to a public hearing, of CRC here in Delhi. I said that this we have done, by the way, multiple times, but this time we have told them also that the way you set O&M expenditures, the baseline, you take the actual of the last year of the previous control year, and then it's okay, let's escalate it by 5.28%, and then we take it forward. I say, why can't you put an X factor? And essentially, this is what you have been saying, that, and you apply the method of DEA or something, try to get that and make the ball rolling. In fact, if you say the order M is to some extent is also acceptable to a limited extent, because people will say, well, if somebody is too efficient, I can't really manage them, so don't penalize me. And another thing which is happening is also the availability of data itself. And this we have also highlighted at the public hearing there, that the kind of data which is submitted to regulator, it is actually has a lot of information asymmetry, and it also has a sample selection bias. Because if you know that the regulator is going to use the efficient generators numbers to fix everybody else, well, the efficient guy doesn't want to come up front and share the numbers, but these are the inefficients which you are going to come up and share the numbers, isn't it? So there is a sample selection bias itself, that what kind of benchmark will be set up. Unless you mandate it for everybody and try to come up with an exercise, which can be also. Two of my PhD scholars, they are presenting here at this conference tomorrow, and one of them is working on generation, other is working on the distribution side, and they'll try to perhaps bring some of these issues. As far as the distribution is concerned, you have the O&M expenditure like says, but there are some operational parameters, for example, transmission and distribution losses, the collection efficiency, the operational parameters of SAFI, SARI, or standards of performance, which are essentially can also be used for efficiency benchmarks. Now, I don't have a model and thing I'm not trying to present here. I just wanted to highlight that where it is going to make some kind of an inroad into the regulatory approach, and where we have been trying to at least convince, and we have submitted at times some of our results also to the regulatory institutions, that there is a way to adopt some of those economic methods which make sense to a lot of regulators across the world, but it has not been able to make inroad here. I think that's it from my side, and if you are interested, you can check other things on our website. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Singh.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
Comment if you
Please.
go back one slide.
For sure.
Sorry, it's not. It's really more an observation rather than a question. But if you just go back one slide, yes, there. For those who are not familiar with the initials, SAIFI and SAIDI, a sort of right column, last but one line, relate to interruptions, isn't that right?
Right.
A number
Frequency
of
and
interruptions,
duration.
and yeah, I just wanted to mention that this is part of what I didn't have a time to cover this morning when I made the presentation, but it's about quality of the service. In other words, the fewer the interruptions, the better the quality. And the regulators tend to adopt two different approaches to this. One is where they set a standard for what they would allow in terms of interruptions based on, let's say, what might be average or best practice. And then anybody who falls short of that is penalized, and anybody who exceeds that is rewarded. The other approach is the Norwegian one that you had earlier, where the interruptions, the loss of electricity, is actually integrated into the cost base, or the cost that is being modeled. And then obviously, if you have interruptions, your cost base goes up, your outputs stay where they are, so you show less efficient. And so there is this issue regulators would face, which of these two to adopt as an approach, because if you set a standard, then people would see directly the relevance of the quality they deliver to the quality they deliver to the revenues they're allowed. They would see directly the connection, but then they would only try to reach that standard. Whereas in the Norwegian approach, if you integrate into the cost, they could try to ever improve the quality. But it's less direct to see, because the cost for lost electricity might be a small part of the overall cost base. So I just wanted to highlight this really for the audience in terms of that detail.
Yeah, just wanted to add to this for everybody's also knowledge that in the Indian context, whenever the modeling exercises are being the cost of unserved energy is not being considered in the regulatory tariff setting, but it is considered when you are thinking of, for example, capacity expansion planning, right? So in those kind of models, they generally put it because they say, okay, in future going down the line, if it is not available, I should feel the penalty for it, and then of course, let's add some capacity. But you're right, as of now, the approach in the Indian context is set a standard for it, but don't include it explicitly into your, the regulated cost. But if you bring it explicitly, then the incentive is 100%. If you don't really provide for it, you will lose money, right?
Thank you both. Any questions for processing, because he has to leave shortly. Yeah, I think everyone is waiting to take a break. But thank you so much, processing, for your presentation, for enlightening presentation. I hope now that you've joined this forum, so I hope you can continue be with this kind of these events in the future. Sure. In particular, there is an event we are organizing next year in Lisbon. I hope you can join that. It's for, again, economic regulators and academic advisors. And the theme is very interesting. It's focusing on investability. I don't know if that's a concept that has come up in India, but essentially given the energy transition investment, so regulators, various regulators, including those who presented today, they are debating, well, clearly new investments need to come into the sector. So for that, they have to make sure that the return on capital and all that is at a sufficiently high level, but at what cost? At what cost? Yeah, so it'll be a very high level debate with senior audience, and it'll be nice to have some Indian regulators join that if possible. Yeah. We are planning for late May, early June, but it'll be nice to have you there, either remotely or in person. Okay.
Somebody, yeah.
I don't know if anyone has questions, but we probably need to break now for 10 minutes because I think we have stayed here for quite some time. But thank you again to processing. And I think Rui, Rita, and I saw Professor Giat as well online. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. So it's 3:33 now. We're going to convene at 3:43. I'm sorry for the very short break, but do use the break and come back in 10 minutes. So we're going to start the session at 3:45. Okay. Thank you so much. See you in a bit.
official will say that. That is efficient because I move fast.
No, but the exporter will not agree. Suppose you have a cutoff date to bring the cargo, say 5 to 7 days. Some port has a cutoff date to bring the cargo, 24 days. So, one who brings 7 days has a 7 days import market, import limit. For them, the
Say if I want to put in a warehouse my cargo for 7 days, which will make it on the ship.
yes,
You mean to say that?
yes.
So that's the time that I'm getting.
Not only money, the holding cost.
Holding cost, they give you free time.
No, free time is there.
They give you 14 days free time earlier. I don't know what
But my gas fee and salary is 7 days अगर मैं पहले करता तो I would have got back my money 7 days.
So I will be using according to the shipment schedule. You know, where will I move it early?
No, port से the cutoff day of 5 days आपको लाना ही पड़ेगा. जहाज आने से 5 दिन पहले आपको
लाना पड़ता है.
हाँ वो जो पोर्ट में कम है वो पोर्ट में डाला जाता है. हाँ तो अभी वाइजैक में जैसे 24 आवर्स अब आदि में 3 तो कंटेनर में लोग वाइजैक प्रेफर करते हैं नॉट पार. तो ये शिपर चॉइस होगा
क्योंकि उनको बीए जल्दी मिल जाएगा. जल्दी
वो भी जल्दी एलपी में पेमेंट उठाएगा. आपका एक्सपोर्टर हो आपको क्या होगा.
सर मैं तो लेकिन सर एक चीज और है. मैं पैराडाइज भेजूंगी या वाइजैक भेजूंगी. डिपेंड्स वेयर इज माय फैक्ट्री, व्हाट इज माय लॉजिस्टिक्स कॉस्ट.
नहीं
So I will see that also.
I will put another perspective to it.
Okay, this is becoming interesting. I should have seen your presentation then. But can you share that, sir? हमारे टाइम पे बहुत कुछ अलग था. ये किस पे लगेगा मैंने? वो भी है मैंने. वो एक मैंने. वो ये तो पता नहीं है. क्या हो गया? टेनिस करती है सॉरी आपकी. ये बात है. ठीक है. क्यों ऐसा करें? पागल है. टॉक्सिक हो गया. तुमने खा लिया? कॉफी बस एक कॉफी जा तो जल्दी जा. बंद हो रहा है.
Hi, Rui. I don't know if you can hear. Yeah. So we
Yes,
had
I
a.
listen you.
Okay.
Greetings.
Hi, Rui. I'm so sorry for the delay, and thank you so much for being patient. It's just that we had to start late. The previous sessions overran, and we had lunch before, so everything overran, and we're still playing catch up. I'm still waiting for people to come back to the room. Hopefully, they'll be back in a couple of minutes, and we can start. You may want to start sharing your presentations, your presentation, just to see if it works.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, we can see you, but it's very clear. Yeah, just to make sure that we can, if you're able to share your screen on your presentation on the screen, that'll be helpful.
Are you seeing now?
Yes, perfect. Give us a few minutes. So even though I said 10 minutes, I think they're going to take a bit longer. So
Okay.
give us a few minutes, and we'll work within your schedule. So if you have only 15 minutes, we'll work within that. So give us a few minutes. Thank you.
Srini, now that we're at this, Gert speaking.
Yeah, hi, Gert.
Hi. Happy to be here. Would it be an idea to take the opportunity and for me to test whether I can share the...
Yeah, of course.
Well,
yeah, feel free to. I mean, Rui, Gert is trying to share his. Yeah. So if you take it down, he can do it.
Okay.
Right. Okay. I'm here now. Do you see this?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And can I also use this? Does this work?
Yeah, it works.
Excellent.
Yeah, it works. Yeah, brilliant. And
Good.
sorry
Well,
for the delay as well. So please, apologies for that, and thank you for being patient.
yes, not a problem. I'm
No
happy to be
problem.
here. So,
Yeah. So I'm going to get people back in the room. Okay. So
yes.
I'm going to disappear for a minute here.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Oh, yeah. Yes. If you don't mind, bring everyone in. Absolutely. Yeah.
Hi, Srini. It's difficult to get everyone back from any break, lunch break or tea break. So,
We made people, be in the room for like close to 2 hours. So everyone needed a break, but we have some lovely tea and snacks. So I think people are going for a couple of rounds to energize themselves before the gala dinner this evening.
yeah, good idea to bring them back soon. Yeah.
We had some very good presentations, and they're all like very, very good speakers. So Daniel, very, very smart. Torres is well established. Emil as well, a very bright scholar. And as I said, Daniel has plenty of experience when it comes to benchmarking in water energy sector. So yeah, very nice to have them. And there's a lot of interest in being part of these conferences. So
The first three speakers were brilliant, actually. Yes, I'm looking forward to listening the next two. Quite a experienced team of speakers and very good insight, not only in the field itself, but also modeling, which is quite impressive.
No, it is really impressive how they not just provide the bigger picture, but also the details. And so glad that we could have Professor Anup Singh as well join us.
Yes,
As you probably saw in the earlier email, I've been trying to connect with him, given that he has been coming to Europe and UK quite a bit to learn about how regulation works there and share his experience of working with Indian regulators. And now we are bringing all of that to Delhi, much closer to Kanpur. So yeah, it'll be a nice kind of, it's been a nice relationship. Good to establish that, and hopefully he can be part of this community going forward.
Yeah, that's a valuable addition, I think, in the Indian context and also in the global scene, so important. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm sorry I'm not being able to be there, but yeah, it's good to be part of it online. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you.
Yes, thank you.
I'll also try to get some people back in the room. It's not clear why. Remember? Yes, please. The session is start now. Sorry, can you please come back? Oh, yeah, please. I'm not sure that's Oh no, not that. So if you can ask someone to get me.
That water which is kept on the table is fresh stuff. But check करना है तो
Yeah, so I think if you move.
Can you call the class?
Not really joining us here, or you have
No, I will be staying here, listening to.
Well, to the speakers, no, there's someone else. Yeah, I think we should start the session. We may get more attendees after. So welcome back again to the regulation stream of DE 2024. We have two more speakers. So the first speaker to kick off the afternoon session is Rui Rita, who's with the Portuguese Energy Authority, ERSA. ERSA has a huge reputation for in-house work. So they have so much in-house talent that they don't hand over the work to fancy consultants, and then they actually get the hands dirty. They do the design and implementation of regulatory framework themselves. Rui will talk about, I believe, a recent benchmarking study, an international benchmarking study they did in collaboration with some academics on natural gas. Over to you, Rui, and thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you. Greetings from Portugal. Then first of all, I would like to thank you for the invitations and for the opportunity to share our work. It is a great pleasure that we do so. I will present a benchmark exercise that we carry out to support the decision related with the efficiency targets defining for our gas distribution companies within the scope of definitions of parameters for the regulatory period from 2024 to 2027. I will share with you the steps that we took for this exercise. As Srini said, this exercise, this benchmarking was developed by my department, and I belongs to the Financial and Economics Department from ERS. Victor Marques is our director, and all my colleagues, Diogo Bárbara and Patrícia Rainha, belongs to the same. Victor Moutinho is the coordinator of the University of Beira Interior, the team of university that collaboration really does in this project related to the econometrics methodology and analysis. Are you seeing my presentation? Okay, sound is okay. Yes. Okay, thank you. My agenda today is I will give a brief overview of the Portuguese gas distribution activity and how it has been regulated. Share with you some goals and shares that we face with this exercise. A presentation, some components of our study, methodology, examples, and the results and the models that you applied for this aim. As you can see, in Portugal, you have 11 DSOs carrying gas distribution, the mainland. These 11 are split in two groups. One group is concessionaire, and that has 6 companies, and the other group, the licensing companies, that have 5. The difference between these two groups is the relations with the transmission connection. Right. The concessionaires are connected to transmission network, and the licensors not are connected. They need to use gasifications autonomous units and the supply by trucks. Here you can see this is network, transmission network. This black line. These color lines are the areas that are assigned by concession agreement, but don't mean that every municipals, because these small pieces are our municipals, don't mean that everyone has gas distribution. Only the municipals without these black lines have gas distribution. So this is a assigned area, but don't have gas distributions. As you can see, we in the north, all areas are assigned, but in south not. In terms of dimensions, as you can see, the distributions, our company distributes around 25 terawatts of energy, and we have around 1.5 million clients or supply points. I know this is smaller compared to India, but this is our reality. You have other problems that are related with our benchmark exercise, the exchange that we faced, because we have 11 companies, but to be honest, there are 3, because 9 of them belongs to the same group, economic group, have the same holding. So it was a problem for us. We regulated the gas distribution since 2008. From the beginning, we use the incentive regulation methodology to set the allowed revenues for these companies, based on the traditional building of CAPEX and OPEX. For CAPEX, for the investment, we use a rate of return because we access before the investment decision, the plans. So is the reason that we apply for a rate of return, but for the operational costs, the evolutions and the acceptance costs will be subject to retail price index and the X, the target efficiency target. So I'm sorry. Sorry. I think that I'm continuing to sharing with you. I think that.
But hopefully you can reach.
Now it's okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, sorry. As you can see, our biggest concern is to define a fair X or efficient target for our companies. As you know, this methodology is as aim to get the companies to achieve a certain level of costs. So we need to do in a fair way to achieve this efficient target. As you know, use this methodology, disincentive methodology. You knows that to achieve the efficiency target or to leave the companies or to get the companies that achieve a certain level of cost, you can't do it, or you must you can't want everything at once. No? You need to go through step by step, moment by moment. And to be successful, to have success with this methodology, we need to give the companies some economic motivations. How you do that? No? Sorry, I'm trying. Okay. What you want? You want to get companies that have initial costs level that they decrease this level. So you put or you define a efficient target. What is the motivation for the companies? They need to have a motivation to be engaged of this process. So they need to earn something. If their performance is better than our efficient target, they will gain something. And consumers will gain the same. So this is a game that everybody should gain something to be successful in this process. We know that we can't get in on regulatory period, achieve our aim related with the levels of with the level of cost. So you need to think and to plan during this or doing this during several periods, regulatory periods. In our case, it's important because, as you will see, our DSOs have different behavior. They have different locations to the level of cost that you want that they achieve. So the goals and the aim for this study is to fix, as I said, is to fix and to set the target efficiency for our companies for the new regulatory period from 2007. Our aim or the proposal of this methodology is to drive the companies to an efficient level of costs. Of course, we would like that is more close to the frontier cost, the efficiency level better. But as you see, as I said before, we have a problem to develop a benchmarking with this example of our DSOs. We have 11, but in real they are 3. So for this proposal, for to be success with this exercise of benchmark, was very important to have collaboration of CNC from our colleagues, the regulatory colleague from Spain. It's very important because they have joint work, as well the collaborations with the University of Superior Interior, because it was important to find a good methodology, a robust methodology for this kind of data that you have. As I was saying, this exercise, we have a great challenge, because to be successful realizing this kind of studies, because of research benchmarking, first of all, we need to have a quality of collected data. You need to have a true peers. The most challenge that we have is to find the true peers. With this, find a robust procedures and robust methodology to get good support for our decision. Because when in the end of the day, when we publish our parents, our DSO on complain with three variables. They are only concerning three situations: WACC, remuneration of facts, of course, allowed revenues, acceptance cost, and the efficiency target. So you need to be transparent with this process to protect and to be fair with everyone that are in this process. So as I said, was a solution that for this challenge was to build a sample of true peers. As I said, the CMC was very important for this process. You did a lot of work around the data, accounting data, physical data, to guarantee that that data are comparable, are related to the effective activity of the distribution activity. You can do this work with join with CMC, because some item costs have different treatment in the both countries. So we try to build the true cost base for each company. Related to the Spain case, they have 20 companies, 20 DSO, but have the same problem that us, because to be honest, they have 4 groups. So it's a similar problem. They have heterogeneous companies in terms of technical and economical in the environment operation. But in the end, we think that we built a very good example for this study. Related to the methodologies, we use 2 methods, a non-parametric and a parametric. A non-parametric use the classic DEA. And use the both orientations and the both methodologies related with the DEA, the constant and variable return to scale. I will show to you how you use off of them. Okay? Use to the Malmquist index, because you want to know for this sector what is the effect of technological progress, as well as parametric methodology. Use the CFA, in particular the High Frontier Production Model. The reasons is that we have multi-outputs and the collaboration with the University of the Interior. They help to choose this model, because after our analysis was the model that best fit our SAMP features and our aims and goals. Related to the models, We develop severe analysis and severe studies, severe literature revisions about the decision related with outputs and inputs. But in the end, we keep the same outputs that we use in benchmarking before, that is this per points energy dispute. Our analysis show that they are the most important and most related cost drive for these companies, in particular for this activity. In terms of output, you choose OPEX because, as you see before, we apply for the OPEX the target, the efficient target. As a result of calibration process with CNC, we have for this study 2 examples. On with the R11 DSOs, but with the data for 6 years, 2016, 2021. And we have a second example, that is a bearing example, that include the Spanish companies. But in this example, you not use the individual companies, but use as the DMU, the groups, the economic groups that the companies are included. As a result, for the first example, I remember that is the example with only with the Portuguese companies. You get the scores for CFE and DEA, and we did a global measure that is the mean of each score, efficiency score. It's all our step. And we did after we did another thing. We pick up of the companies on this global score, that is the mean of DA and CFA, and we built 2 groups, sorry, 4 groups, based in the percentile range. That is corresponded the first correspond the most effective group, the second, and the lowest efficient group. So it's our option, our proceeding to define the efficient targets was to split our results in 4 groups using the percentile range. You do the same for the Iberian example. As I said, in this, we don't use the individual companies, but the economic group from each country. You do the same. We fit the efficiency score for DA, the efficiency score for CFA. We calculate the global efficiency score and split this in 4 groups, efficiency groups. These results are very interesting because we can understand the performance of each country was robust, was similar when we analyze the Portuguese example and the Iberian example. The most efficient company is the same in both results. As I said before, we fit as well the Malmquist index to get the effect or the effect of the technological progress. In our results, in our analysis, the results points to 1.5% as effect of technological progress on the efficiency of these companies. So to set and the definitions about how we do the definition of our efficient targets. As I said before, use the 2 groups, and for the most efficient group, we applied the as efficient score, as efficient target, value around the effect of progress technology. Why? We do this exercise. For us, this is a very important tool for support our decision, but we don't look in a blind way for these results. To support our decision, of course, you look for these results, but as well for the analysis that we do the past performance of these companies and their behavior and their economic behavior. So when you decide 1.5 is the result of these all analysis, benchmarking, economic analysis, past. The second less efficient group, we use the reference of the technology progress and increase 0.5 percentage points. And the same for the third group. Last group, the less efficient group, we don't follow the same percent. They have a little more higher target. Do the past performance, because they have, for instance, this company belongs a small group, but we did some analysis and realized that they like to put some cost from activities not related, that not related, for the activities for this company that is regulated. So this company has less risk. So to mitigate this problem, we increase their target efficiency. In terms of conclusions and further analysis, we'd like, until now, our benchmark exercise are supporting only economic variables and physical variables. In the future, we'd like to increase the number of variables. In particular, we want to increase qualitative factors in our analysis. For instance, we realized that the companies, they are located in different zones. For instance, the companies that are operating in urban zones are most efficient than the companies that are operating in a mixed zone, urban and rural, and less efficient are the companies in rural zones. So in future analysis, you'd like to include other variables in our analysis. Nowadays, we are performing. Sorry for the delay, but I will finish. Nowadays, we are performing benchmarking for the, let's say, the SEO. We are trying to include now this kind of variables. Thank you very much for your attention. Sorry for the delay, for my accent. Now I am available to answer to your questions.
Yeah, muito obrigado, Rui. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was very, very interesting. I was just telling Emmanuel next to me that the application you kind of covered is one of the most interesting benchmarking applications I've seen. It's very hugely challenging to do international comparisons. Yeah, and as we know, some European agencies try doing this, every 3-4 years, but it takes multiple years to do it, and they have lots of consultants, and you manage to collaborate with the university to do it on your own. So well done to you, and thank you again. Any questions from the audience for Rui? Including, of course, those online. I can't see, so you have to speak up if you have a question. I don't think we have any online. No, there are some online. Oh, there are no online questions. Oh, yeah, please. Do you have a mic with you? Okay. Do you want to come up or hold on the line, Rui? So there's one question for you.
Okay, welcome.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. I don't know if it's relevant to the research topic, but I wanted to find out if this research that you were doing, was it only for the developed, or was also is it applicable for the developed and the developing countries so that they can be able to use the same methods in trying to achieve efficiency as well? Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I don't know if it's one for Rui to answer, but I can perhaps make a start. So, it's a good question that, yeah, there are differences, there are challenges in terms of applying it in different economies. And the reason, so today we've been hearing from lots of speakers from Europe. And the reason why we have a lot of these applications in Europe is because they've been implementing these methods for at least 45 years. And so they have, over the course of 45 years, they managed to get a very solid data set that they can rely on. So it is not to do necessarily with developing and undeveloped, but rather in terms of how mature the sectors are to apply these methods in practice. And because they've been, and Emmanuel was one of the pioneers in terms of 40 years back, he was advising UK water regulator to initiate this process. He was looking into different methods that could be applied. So some economies do have that rich history of regulation, and there's a lot of not just the history, but also there is appetite for using economics in regulation. So I don't know if you were there for the earlier session. Professor Anup Singh was saying that it's quite difficult for him to convince Indian regulators to look into these methods. And the reason is because there's a lot of resistance to use these methods. It's a huge unknown as to what the results will look like, because you are relying on a piece of computer, in terms of the results it's kind of spitting out. So the applications are everywhere. It's just that it takes a bit of time. You need a lot of patience in terms of getting the data quite mature, and also what your objective is. What is it that you're trying to benchmark? What your focus is? But it does work in different economies. Emmanuel?
Well, I have a question for Rui, but just to finish off, in your case, as far as the methodologies are concerned, whether it's DEA or SFA, you can apply it anywhere where you have the data. I suppose, just putting a bit more flesh on what you're saying, but in the context that we have been speaking in regulation here, you have to have a whole underlying system of government that will have set up the regulator as an independent body, and would have also required then those companies, or if they're not privatized, because they could still be, I'm not sure whether in the developing countries, the companies are privatized or they're still run by the state or the local authorities, as they are still in Europe in many places. You need then to have the legal framework that would require those operators to deliver data to the regulator and conform, I should say, to whatever the regulator says. So it's really more a policy and government rather than the actual methodology. The methodology is applicable. I think, actually, we've lost your picture, Rui, but I assume you're still there. Although there is some other signal there.
There is a message going, but do you want to ask a question, assuming Rui is on the line?
Yes, I think my question was, he mentioned that 9 out of 11 companies are owned by the same company. And I wonder whether that raises issues of shared costs between these companies, and how those shared costs are then allocated if the actual licensees are assessed separately, as if they're independent bodies, notwithstanding the fact that they're owned by the same company. How have you, if you've addressed that sort of question, because there must be joint costs. And then one thing that has arisen, I believe, in the UK, where if you have a very large company, presumably the one that has 9 companies, can borrow at a much lower rate than the smaller companies can, and how is that taken care of in terms of the regulation? Now, if you are there, Rui, please answer.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
No, it's true. Are you listening?
Yes, we are here.
Yeah, we can hear you, Rui, yeah.
No, it's true, I said, because when we realized, for instance, for that 9 companies that are around all the territory, south and north, but the decision, we realized that the decisions are taken in the headquarters in Lisbon. As well, the cost allocated is the reason that we have tried in this analysis to include in our benchmark, in our analysis, some variables related to the concessionary sensitive companies that are in inland or coastline, that have the same owner, the same holding, but the result wasn't conclusive. But our analysis behind the benchmarking showed to us that the companies, these 211 companies, are not independent. They are the cost allocations for each is decided, is a central decision, is a decision in the headquarters of these companies. So when you take our decisions, you take in account in this process and we try to give them or to the same decision as a group, not individual companies.
Yeah, and if I can add to Rui's answer, Emmanuel, it's a great point that there are companies part of the same owners and they can manage certain efficiency. So the way other regulators do it is to split between direct OPEX and indirect OPEX. So direct OPEX, that is relatable to the size of the individual licensee or network and the regional factors these companies operate in. Indirect expenditures, what you're referring to in terms of shared overhead costs. So they model that at the company level rather than at the licensee level. So the overheads, for example, Ofgem, Ofwat, they model that at the group level, while the direct OPEX and capital expenditure, they are modeled at the licensee level. And coming to your next question in terms of the ability to raise capital cheaper for bigger companies. So in some countries, we can see a concept called small company premium. So for small companies, because they cannot access the financial markets at the same ease as bigger companies, they get a premium in terms of additional rate of return. So that's also very commonly looked at at least in the UK. I don't think we have any further questions, so we have to move on to the next speaker. But thank you again, Rui, for staying with us, for being flexible.
Okay,
I'll see you in Lisbon next year.
I'm sorry to say, but as I said before, I have a meeting in 11 of, so I can stay here with you. I'm sorry for the inconvenience.
That's okay. That's okay. We've kind of delayed plenty here. So thank you, Rui. Yeah, enjoy. Good luck with the meeting.
Thank you very much for everything.
Cheers. So we come on to our final speaker, Professor Geert Brunkref. I can see Geert on the online. Sorry, can someone address that message that we see on the screen? There is an error message there. So I don't know who has access. Can you just either close it down or press OK? Because it kind of distracts us. Yes. Is there a touch screen or a? Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Sorry, Geert. So our final speaker is Professor Geert Brunkref, who is with the Constructor University in Bremen. Geert is one of those rare academics who has advised multiple major energy regulators, especially in Netherlands and Germany. And I also believe that he is now advising energy companies as well. He will be, I understand, he'll be talking about his recent work, his recent advice to the Dutch Energy Authority on improving incentives for network reinforcement in the context of energy transition. Thank you, Geert, for joining us. Sorry for the significant delay. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rini. Can you hear me and can you see the screen, the slides? Yes, excellent. Okay, good. Thank you very much. So pleasure to be here, and a warm say hello to India. I'm sorry I cannot be there in person. I visited India a couple of times and I really love the country, so I would have loved to be there, but hey ho, the flight is very long. My name is Gert Brunigreeft. I'm professor for energy economics at the Constructor University in Bremen, and Bremen is a city in the northwest of Germany, and western from the northwest is the border to the Netherlands. It's very close, actually, only an hour or so. And this is for me important because I am actually Dutch. I was born and raised in the Netherlands. And so I kind of go in between two countries, but I work in and live in Germany at the moment. Bremen is very close to the coast, and that also means to the North Sea coast, and it also means that we have a lot of wind, and therefore also a lot of wind energy, which kind of drives regulatory perspective on energy networks. So a lot is happening here. Good. I'm going to talk about, say, kind of new-ish developments in regulation, be it from the Netherlands, be it in Germany. It's more or less the same anyhow, so it doesn't really matter on which country I talk. On grid reinforcement, electricity grid reinforcement, but also a lot happens in gas, so we'll touch upon gas networks as well. To give it away, I'm probably a bit of a strange duck in the pond in this workshop, in this conference, because I don't know too much about benchmarking. I know a lot about regulation, and benchmarking is a big part or an important part of regulation. But so I don't do benchmarking myself. I know what it is, and I can say something about it. It may not be correct, perhaps, but I can say something about it. But I'm not an expert on this. To put it away, so I like words, not per se numbers. Good. Why the title? I had the pleasure of doing a study for the regulator in the Netherlands, as mentioned in my home country, the ACM in The Hague, on precisely this issue, improving regulatory incentives for electricity grid reinforcement. So the regulator in the Netherlands is now also in the process to prepare the next regulatory period, which is about to start, I think, in 2027. So they have some years to prepare this and take a lot of kind of time to do this well. And my task was to set out what are the thoughts from an academic perspective and what is in discussion on how to change or adapt the regulation to set incentives to improve grid reinforcement, to improve grid reliability, if you like. Not per se investment. You do not need per se investment to improve or to reinforce the grid or to improve quality of the grid. But of course, we're first thinking about incentives. This is in this report here. After that, then, and that is also important now, Germany is in the same process at the moment. Also, the regulator, the Bundesnetzagentur, is also preparing the next regulatory period in Germany, gas and electricity, starting 26, I think, different stages for gas and electricity. And also there, I'm involved in this process for companies and the regulator to give my views on this, which is an honor to do. And as mentioned, by and large, the topics are the same. Basically, the network is too small, heavily congested, and we have to do something about it. That is by and large the topic at the moment to get us through the energy transition. Good, that is a background. So today I would like to do two things. Basically, first, I have some thoughts on the future of benchmarking, which is a headache, both in the Netherlands and in Germany. Basically, I would say because of the gas networks, where we really don't know what to do at the moment. Therefore, I'm going to have some thoughts about this. This is not something which has been thought through. It's just thought, how can we proceed to avoid that we have to give up benchmarking of gas networks, because that is actually in a discussion at the moment. And secondly, then after that, I'm going to share some thoughts on what I consider to be a relatively new development in regulation, which I call output-oriented regulation. And what we see happening at the moment in many countries, and Srini, coming from the UK, knows about these issues a lot. We talked about this as well recently. In the UK, this is already quite advanced, and other countries are picking this up. What we see happening, I think, is that we move away a bit from efficiency focus only in regulation and go to guidance in the energy transition type of regulation to see whether we can fill out blind spots where companies know we have to do something, but don't because they have no incentives to do that, but it costs money and they don't get a return on this. And so that is where this type of regulation, called this output-based regulation, output-oriented regulation, tries to step in and set targeted incentives to fill out these black spots or blind spots to guide us through the energy transition. And so that's a new-ish development in regulation, and this is also in the discussion in Germany at the moment. I have too many slides. I will simply stop at some point if time is over, right? I have no ambition to go through all the slides or tell everything. Just give you an impression, that will be all. Good. First, say some thoughts, sharing some thoughts on benchmarking and basically also what is in the discussion at the moment in Germany and in the Netherlands. 2 slides on this only. So what we see is that the development of the networks, electricity and gas, is no longer independent. They very much are combined at the moment or interacted, the developments of these networks, electricity and gas. But what seems to be more of a headache is that other developments are kicking in and determine to a large extent what happens in the electricity and especially gas networks. 3 things especially, there may be more, and this is all driven by the energy transition, climate policy. First, the heat transition, which has taken place in Germany and in the Netherlands, and especially heat networks, city heating, I think this is called, are being rolled out at the moment, and this affects the gas networks to a large extent. There, where heat networks are being rolled out, the gas networks need to withdraw, basically. You don't have to do this at the same time. You don't have to have this at the same time. So whatever happens with the gas networks at the moment is determined to a large extent by what happens on the heat market or heat networks. And this is government driven. Secondly, the hydrogen network is being rolled out. And what we see also, this affects the gas networks because the gas networks are in the process of repurposing, changing the purpose of a gas networks to transport hydrogen. That is, again, a headache. We don't know exactly what is good and wise policy to do that. But what we do know is that this affects the regulation and the benchmarking of the gas networks, especially. Lastly then, but that is less of an effect at the moment, rollout of CO2 CCS networks, so transporting of CO2 to store this somewhere in the North Sea. Also here, the network is being rolled out at the moment, but these are relatively large pipelines for bulk transport, and it doesn't really affect, as far as I can tell, the electricity and gas networks only to some extent. Gas more than electricity, it happens, but the main drivers are heat and hydrogen at the moment, and this changes everything. What are these changes, which are very challenging for the regulation and for the benchmarking, especially for the benchmarking? I listed 5, there may be more, perhaps there's some overlap as well. First, massive changes in network infrastructure are about to happen, if not already taking place. And one of the things which are changing there, I would say, is that our focus moves away from backwards principles, backward-looking principles in regulation benchmarking, towards forward-looking visions on regulation and benchmarking. So away from backward-looking to forward-looking. This changes the regulation and also the benchmarking in the middle of the process, I would say. Secondly, then, uncertainty. So to put it this way, we do not know what is going to happen next in these sectors. Electricity, I think, is more or less straightforward. It's a kind of a linear development towards smart grids, towards the energy transition, which is solar-based and wind-based, and a couple of other things. Of course, storage is a big issue, but in gas, it's totally unclear what's going to happen in the next 2 years, or the next 2 years, the next 10 years or so. And so the companies in their development face a lot of uncertainty. We talk about anticipatory investments. Okay, and anticipatory investments, or making investments basically under uncertainty, means also we have difficulty with the benchmark, because if we find out ex post that an investment was wrong, which was correct ex ante, are we going to punish the company for this? No, we should not. Of course, we should allow ex ante right decisions, which then later, as nature decides, turn out to be wrong. And this is the difficulty with anticipatory investments. It's a big issue. Third, exogenous drivers, especially the government policy, climate policy, which is necessary, don't get me wrong, but government policy is exogenously driving the policy of the network companies in gas and electricity. They just have to do things, whether they like it or not, whether it's efficient or not. They must secure that some targets or goals are going to be reached. And that also means that in the benchmark, in the regulation, we have to be very careful that we do not punish as inefficient something which the companies had to do because it's exogenously given. So this is something which emerges a lot, as far as I can tell, and in the discussions with the network operators. Fourth, heterogeneity, very difficult word to pronounce. Especially the gas network, but also electricity. We find that they follow now, exogenously driven in part, different developments. And so already happening, but certainly in 5 years from now, we will see that they may be very different. And it may be very difficult to benchmark these, as we just also heard from Rui. And this is happening at a fast pace in both sectors, electricity and gas, but especially in gas. In gas, we see that companies are decommissioning assets, lines, or they repurpose assets for hydrogen or do something completely different. And in electricity, we see that some companies face a lot of wind, some solar, and some business as usual, or are very busy doing things for smart grids. So also there we see that there are different developments going on, which is going to be challenging or is challenging for benchmarking. What I sense from the discussion in Germany is that the fourth point, heterogeneity, is the big issue. People are really looking into this. How are we going to do this? And it goes so fast, apparently, that there are some voices emerging at the moment. What I hear is that perhaps we should not benchmark at all at some point, just leave it for the time being. That seems to be a bit drastic for me. So actually, I would like to look into possibilities to save at least some bit of benchmarking for efficiency purposes and then see what happens later. But this is a very serious issue, that to underline this. Lastly, then, different timing of investment and decommissioning. They may be in different stages of the development, which again make benchmarking difficult. So these are the challenges we face at the moment, thinking about regulation and benchmarking. So what can we do? Very briefly. So these are really thoughts, just thoughts. I don't know too much about benchmarking. You are the experts on this. You have to tell me, not the other way around. But I would just kind of share this with you. And then see what happens. It seems to me that the difficulty with the challenges we have at the moment is what is called used and useful, the use of the line. For example, the uncertainty, anticipatory investments. You build a line which sounded like a good idea ex ante, but ex post, nature decided differently. Ex post, it turns out that the line is not used. Now, this may be good and a wise decision ex ante, and ex post what happens is not the concern of the company, basically. It's just bad luck, but still good for society. And that is a matter of used and useful. It turns out the line is not used. And exposed, not useful. And precisely this is what you do not want to punish. Okay, and therefore you would want to exclude this from the benchmarking, the used and useful aspect. And this is basically the asset of your network. Is the line there or not? And so the future of benchmarking may thus be that we exclude the assets of the line, basically, from the test. And whether a line is invested or not may be part of then what is called the network development plans. There's a lot of information in these plans, and we can actually use this information to say something about the use and usefulness of the investment plans. And if it's granted, take it out of the benchmarking, which is done in part anyhow. This leaves then the cost of the network as given to be benchmarked. So the network is there, given, and whether the thing is used or not is no longer part of regulation, no longer part of the benchmark, but the cost of the given network would be benchmarked. And then we would have to think about models how to do this. One option would be, it seems to me, but you are the experts on this, I don't know whether you can do this or not, whether it can be done or not, is to, in the benchmark models we know, take out all the usage variables, if this is the problem, right? And you would be stuck, or this would leave the assets, or the network assets only, the stock variables in your benchmark. And this brings us basically to a development, Srini knows a lot about this, which is taking place also at the moment, the unit cost approach or the norm grid approach, which basically, I would say, benchmarks the cost of a given network. And a given network would then be, by and large, the sum of the assets, if you like. Srini, no doubt, is going to correct me here. But as mentioned, I'm not an expert on benchmarking, so I can use these very general words. Good, a split of your benchmark methods to kick out the used and useful test to save the networks from heterogeneity, for which the network operators can't do too much. Good, okay. My thoughts on benchmarking now has taken up quite a bit of time, I see, so I have to speed a little for the next slides. The second issue is mentioned, and that is not so much related to output-oriented, to benchmarking, but it's a kind of a newish development in regulation, would be on output-oriented regulation. I worked on this for some time now in a more academic setting, but much to my surprise and pleasure, I saw that the regulator in Germany, the Bundesnetzagentur, picked up precisely this issue recently for the preparation of the regulation for the next round of regulation for gas and electricity. There it is called in German Energiewendekompetenz, which is translated as energy transition competence. If you run into this word in this context, this means actually the output-oriented regulation, or as I think people in the UK would also call this output-based regulation, or in the US. So it's precisely the same, but a stronger focus on what happens in energy transition. Good. Speeding up a bit, what is this? I think we see a new phase or an additional phase in regulation. We have seen a long time regulation was, say, dominated by cost-based regulatory models. Then at some point we decided this is not efficient, we're going to do things differently, call this price-based regulation. So your price cap, your revenue cap, and RPI minus X, efficiency-based, bringing the cost down. And meanwhile, we are now in a phase where efficiency-based only is no longer considered to be good, because perhaps this has already been done, or we now move to another world. And now we see that attached to price-based regulatory models, we see targeted output-oriented regulatory elements to steer us to predetermined targets, mostly related to the energy transition. And this is what is called output-oriented relation. So we see that blind spots are being created by the regulation, by the strong focus on efficiency, bringing the cost down. And we find that it is necessary that we set additional incentives for companies to also look at these predetermined targets related to the energy transition. So importantly, output-oriented regulation does not replace price-based regulatory models. It is in addition to, it repairs blind spots. But this is happening in many countries at the moment, and as mentioned, the regulator in Germany is also looking into this. There is a theoretical background to this. What it is, I already mentioned just now. And if you want to know more about the theoretical background, the academic background, I would point out an important paper by A. Michael Spence in 1975, who pointed this out. Avant la lettre, there was no price-based regulation at the moment, but in footnote 5, I think, top of my head, in his paper, which is otherwise about rate of return regulation. In footnote 5, he says, everything changes if we cap the price, then the incentives change. And then he works out basically the base, the theoretical base for quality regulation under price caps, and therefore also the theoretical base for output-oriented regulation. So for those more academically inclined, Spence 1975 would be the paper to look into. I think Belgian of Economics, top of my head. Good. In this work mentioned here in 2020, we looked into possibilities, possible areas where you might want to use output-oriented regulation for electricity networks. And the table here gives an overview of what can be done. So we looked into what happens in the world. This was very early at that moment. What do we see and what does the literature say, and what can we think of ourselves, basically? You can do the same exercise for gas, but you will find that the list is actually so much shorter. So for electricity, it's easier to do than for gas networks. I'm not going to go through to the entire list, which would take me the rest of the day. But so I will pick up very, very briefly, with an eye on the time, a couple of issues. What I would like to point out here in this list is that the German regulator is now also looking into this, in this issue, the energy transition competence, as it is called, and is now at the moment looking what could be applied at all and how can we do this. So two things which are now at the moment in the process. The German regulator already decided that gas is difficult and looks into this in the future. At the moment, he's looking at the electricity networks, and there picks up 3 points at the moment, especially. That would be A2, timely network connections. This is one of the more important points in the Netherlands as well, and in Germany as well. People are looking into for this. A4, the development of smart grids may also be one of the options for an OOR element. And lastly, B2, service quality, the connection to your customers. Also there, the regulator is looking into how to do this and whether it can be done. I would also like to point out F1, which is lacking in the list of the regulator, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in network operation. The network operators, gas and electricity, can do quite a bit themselves to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in their network, scope 1, 2, and 3. And I, for one, think that it should be part of this type of additional regulation. I have, I think, 4 remaining slides to work out a bit these issues. But given the time, I will be very, very brief on this. There's only a couple of minutes left, I guess. Timely network. Sorry?
You can take a couple of minutes.
Couple of minutes. Thank you very much. Okay, so timely network connections, big issue in the Netherlands and in Germany. The networks are so connected, so congested that the network operators have difficulty to connect new connections, be it solar power, wind power, but it may also be, importantly, on the load side, for example, new factories newly being built. They could produce, but they can't because they have no connection to the networks. Yesterday, I read in a newspaper in the Netherlands that an entire campus of the Technical University of Eindhoven faces this problem. They want to have a stronger connection for load, but they can't. The network is not strong enough. So they try to solve the problem themselves with a local smart grid, if you like. This is very clever and very impressive, but it can't be the future of our network. And so the timely network connections is a very big issue, and we have to look into this. And one of the things is you could incentivize the network operators to give this priority. If they are faster with network connection, then they get money for this. If they are slower, they have to pay for this. They are penalized. That can be done in several ways, and this is a discussion, but I would leave that for now. So this is a very big issue in Germany and the Netherlands and other countries. Okay, and it can be done actually to set elements. Development of smart grids, and there may be a bit of an overlap there with the other issue, the connections. You could actually, if smart grids is an output, a desired output, you may want to incentivize this. And then you would have to define what is actually a smart grid, what are the main ingredients of a smart grid. You put it into an index, you give this a number, and you build an incentive mechanisms around this number. You can do this. Whether this is good or not is a big discussion, but it can be done. So if several elements of smart grids is something we want to pursue, I for one think that would be good. Then you can make an incentive mechanism around this. There are examples of smart grid indices. For example, the Grid Modernization Index or the Smart Grid Index. I have the information somewhere where these are developed, somewhere on the world. It can be done. We can also develop something ourselves. And in terms of incentive mechanisms, you can make a monetary incentive mechanisms around this. That might be challenging because you have to rely on numbers where we don't know exactly how this works out. For example, weighing of different targets. But you can also do this reputational, and you make a list of a ranking of the best companies, for example. Okay, these are details how to do this. I think this is an important way, or can be an important way to go about, and we have to see the demarcation with other targets, like, for example, the new connections on the other slide. Reduction of GHG emissions in network operation, already mentioned. The greenhouse gas emissions. Network operators in gas and electricity can do a lot themselves to reduce their GHG emissions. This is not going to save the world, but it can make a contribution to climate protection. And we can do this. We know how to do this. And you can kind of frame this around, I'm sure you know about these things, around what is called scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. This is defined in a way, own emissions, but also emissions of your customers, the users of the network, which would be scope 3. And looking into the emissions of the customers of your network or the users of your network, other stakeholders, scope 3 is an increasingly important issue. We see this happening. I think we can call this extended product responsibility, APR, where the producer is also responsible for what happens with the product. It doesn't stop the responsibility with the moment it leaves the factory or here the network. There is extended responsibility. You can use this to incentivize the network operators up to some limit, by the way. Good. Also an important issue, and I think there is a lot of potential to put this into an OOR element. Lastly, then, last slide, a big issue which is emerging at the moment. A lot of talk about this in Brussels, especially on European level, which is called whole system approach. We start to see that the coordination in the networks and in the combination of the networks, the overall system, the coordination there is not very good, to put it mildly. This could be improved, to put it differently. And this is called whole system approach. An institutional framework or someone, perhaps a coordinator or so, should have the responsibility to improve the coordination in the overall energy system. And this is called whole system approach. Also here, we are thinking about how we could incentivize this for network operators to engage stronger in better coordination, in better whole system approach. But this is very, very early stage. Good. With this, I'm going to stop and thank you very much for your attention, and happy to take any question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gers. Yeah. All right, that was very interesting, a different take, and lots of very novel ideas you've kind of thrown in there. Opening up to the audience, including online. Any questions for Gers? Yeah, I think Emmanuel has a question or an observation.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Gert, for a different take on benchmarking and so on. I've a couple of, really, it's not technical questions, but you say there is discussion of not using benchmarking. And what I wonder is, given that benchmarking at the end of the day involves comparison of companies and the regulator having to protect somehow the consumer, at the moment, the comparison is carried out on a system of modeling. Companies can see what the regulator is doing, what system the regulator is using. They can agree, they can argue, disagree, and so on. But there is a framework in which that discussion can take place. If there is no formal benchmarking of some kind, how is the transparency going to come through? How is a company that feels it's badly done by, how is it going to be able to have a basis on which to argue its case?
Yes, thank you very much for this very good and deep question. I'm afraid the answer is we don't know. So there is some talk about returning to cost-based models, at least for the time being, and for the TSOs, the transmission system operators, gas and electricity, there aren't so many. You could actually do this, and then you would talk to each other, basically. So, like perhaps more or less like in the UK with the business plans, you would imagine that the TSOs then have to kind of justify the expenses they make, ex ante or ex post. And the regulator would then probably engage consultants to check this and have their own models. And then after some negotiations and some cost cutting, they would say, well, that's fine. And then we go. So that would be fairly transparent up to the level that the costs are granted, because these are then under control of the company. Now, the difficulty is you can't actually do this with the DSOs because there are far too many. Talking about Germany, we have, I think, 800 to 900 electricity DSOs and the same number, up to 1,000 or so, gas DSOs. So the regulator would be totally outnumbered if they have to go into so much detail of doing that. And this now is challenging. So I would say that the benchmarking in the electricity DSOs, the distribution companies, will stay I think there is no discussion of canceling that, but the heterogeneity in the gas networks, that is the big point. And as gas networks seem to be a phasing out model anyhow, we might want to think about, well, why don't we just let them phase out? So have a real price cap, if you like, starting from the prices now and then reduce them a bit, somehow correcting for depreciation values, because there's also something going on with accelerated depreciation. And then have some look at it and then just leave it at that. Then, of course, we would have a problem if gas network operators will start to make reinvestments because they need it, or they start to make investment for repurposing for hydrogen. What are we going to do then? So there may be an argument in just leaving it as it is if we kind of phase out the gas networks anyhow. So if there's no longer much investment, we might think, well, so as long as I do not increase the prices, the tariffs, then we're fine. We'll just look away, something like that. But basically, we're in the middle of this process, and I think no one has an answer as yet at the moment what to do.
Well, I mean, yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think this is okay. I mean, just to add to Geert's point, so different regulators are in different kind of, there is a bit of spectrum in terms of where regulators are in terms of use of benchmarking going forward. As Geert kind of helpfully highlighted, clearly these sectors are undergoing a rapid change in terms of significant investments, lots of uncertainty. There is so much need for anticipatory investments. So if you continue to focus on network utilization, smartization of networks, then you're never going to achieve the demand that is expected in the coming years. So regulators are moving away from focusing on utilization efficiency to expansion measures. And it doesn't mean benchmarking disappears. Some regulators believe that benchmarking needs to be even stronger because whatever investment you make, that becomes sunk, right? So and then those tariffs need to be paid by future consumers. But many regulators, including BNetzA, the German regulator, ACM, Ofgem, they want to relax in terms of how the benchmarking was applied. Okay, so the regulators are thinking in terms of where to apply benchmarking. Does it make sense to apply to OPEX? Does it make sense to apply to investments? But how do I take the relationship between investments and OPEX into account? So benchmarking will still have a role in some form. So just to ensure that there's value for money, and of course firms are doing the best they can while ensuring these kind of new capacity becomes available, that becomes necessary. And also these kind of current challenges in terms of network congestion, connection delays, they're also managed as well, and they look better in the coming years. But yeah, the hardcore benchmarking as is seen, that may be relaxed, possibly for one or two price controls, but it'll come back in some form in the future. Geert, just one observation where you're talking about greenhouse gas emission and then, clearly the scope for output-based regulation. You may want to look into Ofwat's recent decision where they had introduced a particular, what is called a price control deliverable in terms of the level of emission target to achieve, and then they provided some penalties and rewards for companies to achieve those. And these penalties and rewards, they don't just apply to the level, but also the timing of those targets as well, like how quickly or how delayed they are achieved. So that may be interesting for you, but I agree with you. So that's an element to be brought into the output-based regulation and through incentives.
May I perhaps add one more thing? Thank you for these thoughts and questions. As to the benchmarking process, so I do not want to give the impression that a decision has been made to kind of not have benchmarking models. That would be really the final stage. And I am also now at the moment involved in a project with other benchmark experts from Polynomics. You know these people, Srini. And we are actually looking into alternatives. How can we adjust the benchmark models we know with the data we have to account for these aspects I mentioned, the uncertainty, heterogeneity, exogenous drivers, right? So, and I'm very optimistic that at some point we're going to find some workable model, which is a good compromise in these difficult, methodologically speaking, difficult situation. But I'm actually confident that we're going to develop the models further to have some kind of good benchmarking tool to get us through here. So that is my personal view on this. Can I? Okay.
Just a quick one. For information, that's not coming on. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
You mentioned there is discussion in Brussels about coordination. And just a quick question, is that coordination across countries or within countries, or both?
Good question. Within countries, I mean, in Brussels, it's across countries is always a topic, but so we're talking basically about within countries, within sectors even. So the whole system approach distinguishes three different aspects, and that would be the coordination between networks in one sector, cross-network coordination. So, and that can also be cross-border, but it doesn't have to be, right? Okay, and especially between TSOs and DSOs. Secondly, the coordination between the networks and the network users within one sector. For example, storage in a network, in an electricity network. Who's going to do this and where? You know, we're going to build this. And so there may be different views on this, and this somehow has to be coordinated. And thirdly, that would be cross-sector coordination. For example, between electricity and gas, but we have seen how many other things happening as well. And this somehow has to be coordinated as well. And of course, none of these actors, stakeholders, are actually working in isolation. People do talk to each other and do look to each other, at each other, but it can be better. It may be institutionalized and incentivized. And that is, I think, what we're looking at. So I would say definitely within countries and even at a very local scale. So.
Thank you so much, Geert. That was, I don't think we have any more questions. Oh, sorry, one question from the audience, so hang on.
Hi, I am Ira from Malaysia. I am neither an expert in benchmark or regulation, but just out of curiosity, I would like to ask, based from my understanding from your presentation just now, it looks like the revenue, the price cap will be increased with the value created, isn't it? Okay. Don't you think it can create a double counting? Because when you want to create extra value, you will increase your capex and opex as well, and then you will increase also at the value created. So I just wondering if there is a double counting there. Another question is, who would pay for the extra value? Because in developing countries like Malaysia, we still have these subsidies, or the value will be 100% passed to the customer. Thank you.
Yes, okay. Making a note. Yes, okay, thank you very much. Very good questions. First, so I presented only kind of the key ideas of what is going on, so of these mechanisms and of OOR. And of course, while implementing, we have to look at details. And then things are heating up. And with double counting, you're absolutely right, absolutely correct. That is something we have to look into. And there are two issues actually. So in double counting, first is it may be that the thing we are trying to incentivize, the metric, is already incentivized somewhere else in the regulation. And so then the same thing, the same target, you would incentivize twice. Well, that is a happy goal for the network operators, of course, because you get paid twice if you do your best. So we have to make sure that there is a clear demarcation between different mechanisms, also with the base mechanism. So that is an important point to avoid double counting. You would overdo, you would have too strong incentives at some point. Secondly, as you point out, you may have double counting if the incentive bonus actually cover parts of the cost, and if the costs are already passed through in your network charges, and we have to look at that as well. So you do want to avoid precisely this type of double counting. You're absolutely correct. And so what we have to look at first in this mechanism, in the mechanism design, is which part or where are the costs of doing this go into in your normal network charges, and then the costs are already covered. And then at that moment, your incentive mechanism would only be the incentive bonus, an extra, but you would have to take out the cost, so to avoid double counting. Or alternatively, you might say, well, perhaps you would put the cost, for example, of administering new connections also in your incentive mechanism. That could also be done, but then you would have to make clear or secure that these costs are not already covered in your base regulation. So you do have to make a demarcation. Spot on, very good question. Important to look at this, and it's kind of in detail. Second question, who pays for all this? Also a very good question. I suppose that at the end of the day, the end users, that may be different in different countries, in other countries. In Germany and the Netherlands, I would say it would be the end users of the sector. So electricity end users, network users, or gas, and not even a mix of that. And I would imagine that the governments in both countries would not want to see this appear in the tax system. So they would want to keep it in these sectors, I think. Now, that would be the easy answer. The more difficult answer is which network users would pay for this. And I'm also working at this moment on, say, an issue on standardization. We see also in, for example, electricity, that some companies, for example, the companies who build and construct wall boxes for people at home to load their electric car, they have economies of scale if they can roll out this system all over the country or even other countries. While what they face is that different network operators who may be very small have their own standards, administrative standards or technical standards. And so if they go from one city to the next city and build in wall boxes, they would have to have a different technology or a different standard, which makes things very expensive. And so we're thinking about how could we create an incentive for the sector overall, all these parties, to agree on a standard to make things cheaper overall. Okay, so, and there you could also think about an incentive mechanism. And there I would be thinking about the people who benefit from this, firstly, in first instance, would be the producers who roll out these wall boxes. For example, you may have other examples. And I would say, well, over some kind of profit sharing mechanisms, they could actually compensate the network operators for adjusting to a standard they benefit from. And there we would just see that the companies among themselves would actually pay for this. At the end of the day, end users are going to pay. But if we do well, we could also say, well, we actually save a lot of money if we have right incentives. So, and then through the back door, the end users would also pay less compared to what have happened otherwise, or could have happened otherwise. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gert. And if you're really interested in kind of working out the mechanics of how the double counting is looked at, I don't know if you're there for the presentation by Daniel Mitchell before tea break, the offered regulator. They go through this in a lot of detail in terms of what is being compensated for as part of the routine base cost that Gert highlighted, and for the incremental investments, what outputs they need to deliver for the base expenditure they're getting, and then the additional incentives and money they need for the new investments. So they make sure that they try to minimize the double counting as much as possible while ensuring that they're able to cover all the investments. Okay, thank you. I don't think we have any further questions, and we are quite late as well. But thank you so much, Gert, for staying with us until this long. Delight to have you. Again, yeah, thanks to everyone who's online, who's been with us as well. I don't see any questions online. Yeah, a nice round of applause to Gert. Thank you, Gert. We don't have time for roundtable discussions. I think we should break now. But again, to all of you, thank you for staying online with us until this late. And well, of course, we're going to see over gala dinner. I think we'll be here this evening. So if you have more questions, if you're interested in knowing about these applications, come speak to one of us. Thank you again. Have a nice evening.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.